This public hearing is being recorded and live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv. And it'll be rebroadcast on Comcast Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and Verizon Channel 1964. So the budget review process, which is ongoing throughout this pandemic season, obviously on Zoom, is encompassing about 27 hearings over roughly 6 weeks, and also council working sessions. And it's really, a chance for us to think about the road ahead, and knowing that even though we're in an emergency, we still have to have a city budget, and it's going to be at the heart of all the personnel and programs that we need in the time ahead. So to that end, we strongly encourage residents to take a moment to engage in this process by giving testimony for the record. You can do that in a number of ways. One is to join a hearing like this, and the Zoom link's available. You can email staff, or it's on the public notice. And then we ask you to wait till the end of the hearing, and then I'll recognize you to speak. I note that we have 2 people I know already signed up for public testimony who I see are in the Zoom, so that's great. You can also come if you don't want to come to one of the particular subject-specific ones. You can come to one of our 2 remaining dedicated public testimony hearings. So on Tuesday, May 26th at 6 p.m., we'll be having one focused on BPS. And on Thursday, May 28th at 6 p.m., we'll have one focused on the rest of the city departments. You can also, at your leisure, email the committee at ccc.wm@boston.gov with written testimony, with a video, or you can go to boston.gov/council-FY21Budget and learn how to submit your testimony there and see our whole budget calendar. So we do hope you'll engage. We also scan Twitter. If you do hashtag BossBudget, BOSBudget, we'll informally take questions there. And very much, like I said, want the public's voices to be involved in this process. So today's hearing is on docket 0588 to 0590, orders for the FY21 operating budget, including annual appropriations for departmental operations, for the school department, and for other post-employment benefits, OPEB. Docket 0591 to 0592, orders for capital fund transfer appropriations. Docket 0593 to 0596, orders for the capital budget, including loan orders and lease purchase agreements. Those dockets collectively make up the FY21 budget as proposed by the mayor. And in addition, today we're also considering docket 0613, which is an order authorizing an appropriation from the Boston Equity Fund to create a special revenue project grant to support equity applicants and licenses to establish and operate a cannabis business in the city of Boston pursuant to City of Boston Ordinances, Chapter 8, Section 13. So that's a new fund, the Boston Equity Fund, that we'll be discussing today. The real subject of the hearing today is the Office of Economic Development and the Boston Equity Fund. And obviously, we find ourselves in a moment where economic development could not possibly be more important. Obviously, everyone has had to shift footing very quickly from, how to handle a boom economy, albeit a boom economy that was serving some people much more than others, to how to handle a really difficult financial situation, but with many of the same equity challenges before us. So we're looking forward to hearing today from John Barros, the Chief of Economic Development for the city, who I see has joined us, and also on his staff, Selena Barrios Milner, the Director of Equity and Inclusion, Natalia Urtube, Director of Small Business and Executive Director of Imagine Boston 2030, Alexis Tikachuk. Alexis, you'll have to forgive me. I should have asked you ahead how to say it. Director of Emerging
You did good. You did good. Yeah.
Director of Emerging Industries. And then I think we have some other members of Chief Barros' staff, Krista Zalatoris and Caitlin Pasafaro and others online as well. So I want to recognize my colleagues who are here. Council President Kim Janey from District 7, Councilor Andrea Campbell from District 4, Councilor Michael Flaherty at large, Councilor Liz Breeden, District 9, Councilor Ricardo Arroyo, District 5, Anissa Sabi George at large, Councilor Julia Mejia at large, and without further ado, Chief Barros, the floor is yours.
Councilor, thank you very much for the opportunity to brief the council on the work of economic development and clearly to have a conversation about our budget. At this point, we are going to share a PowerPoint presentation. Krista?
And I'll also note for my council colleagues that this presentation has just been emailed to you as well. So if you want to follow along on your device.
Thank you.
Krista, is there a way to make it larger? It's sort of at a great distance right now. That seems, yeah, better. Thanks.
So
it's Caitlin who's going to be
Oh, sorry.
advancing the slides. Just a small update.
Great,
okay,
thanks.
thank you very much. So as you noted, we are joined by a team here, and we'll give a quick presentation using PowerPoint slides, and then look forward to the conversation with all counselors. The Office of Economic Development was created by Mayor Walsh in 2014. And we wanted to share with you, as we do always, our strategy as a cabinet is to make sure we have development in all of our neighborhoods without displacement, that neighborhood and stakeholders are engaged in the growth of the city, that we have comprehensive community planning, that we promote Boston as a destination for businesses and visitors, and that we foster and have strong regional and international partnerships. And then we have some priorities as part of the work that we do, and I want to highlight three. Equity and inclusion is an important priority in the work that we do. And as part of that work, we have a couple of different examples. We are always working to make sure that we are creating opportunities in career, workforce development, training, job creation, resources for small businesses and large businesses, particularly for small businesses. And joining that this year will be the Boston Cannabis Equity Fund that we'll be talking about today. But technical assistance is important, and grants and loans that we could provide, and we'll be talking about that today as well. And then a pathway for building net worth. And then in that, most of what we do, in fact, is about business creation, business startup. Next slide. The next priority is business development in general and job growth. And so we are always looking to make Boston a competitive economy, competitive local economy. And part of that is growing our business, but it's also attracting a strong talent pool so that businesses can come here and want to hire here. It's making Boston a place that has, that provides the kind of networking, the kind of connections, the kind of resources that businesses and entrepreneurs want to find. And then it's making sure that our residents have the pathways through these opportunities that we try to bring or create in the city. The next opportunity, or the next priority, is in placemaking and community economic development. So what makes Boston special is not just the jobs that we create or the businesses that we can help grow or bring here. What makes it truly special is the parts of our economy that allows us to be strong neighborhoods, allows us to create place like Main Streets, allows us to have an identity. So it's the arts and cultural component of our city. It's that makes Boston special. It's the sports. It's the places that you eat. All the things that make this place a place where people want to live, work, and play. So what we also want to do is talk about the highlight of the work that we've been doing based on these priorities, but also remind us that the COVID pandemic has really colored a lot of the work that we're doing. So I want to quickly now take us through some of the work that we've been doing around our response to COVID. If we can go to the next slide. And what I really want to start with is our analysis early on, as soon as COVID hit. Next slide. And our early analysis was on the economic impact that it had on workers. So the slide before this. And so you'll see that in our early analysis, the hardest hit industries were industries where most of our residents that were impacted were people who were low wage workers, folks who were most vulnerable. And so these are the top hardest hit industries or sectors. particularly as you weigh unemployment in the early 2 weeks of the pandemic, and they still continue to be the hardest hit industries today. And you can see in here that, you know, about half of those workers, you know, were 50% household, 50% of the income of the household. Many of those workers, in some instances, 65% were under the 300% under the poverty level. So we wanted to immediately focus our efforts here. One of the things I'll highlight that the Office of Economic Development is doing in a partnership with Secretary Acosta and the state, we have sent up 120 volunteers to the state to help provide capacity for them to be able to administer the unemployment benefits from the state. Really important part of our efforts in helping the state do that, because obviously it's a state-run program. Next slide. The next analysis that we did was really about small businesses. And so we immediately launched, as of March 10th, we launched the first survey and had the first survey results on March 16th, and then subsequently launched a series of surveys after that every 10 days to sort of have an analysis of what was happening with our businesses, particularly. And then what we found is particularly our small businesses were hit very hard. You will see percentages of layoff in the business types, retail, physical store locations. Clearly, after they were closed, got hit really badly. Food businesses, but not just because of closing. So we saw some of these numbers before the state order around essential and non-essential businesses. In fact, in our hospitality industry, consumer confidence dropped so low that our restaurants and hotels, before the order to close, lost most of their revenues. And I remember being on a city council hearing before that and announcing to the city council that we had heard from hotels and restaurants that many of them had lost 60, 70% of their revenues because consumers recognized before the state, in fact, that the situation had become pretty dangerous. Next slide. One of the issues we also recognized very early was that it was going to take a serious effort to make sure that our small businesses felt comfortable in applying for assistance. So we learned very early that over 50% of our businesses had only approached the city for assistance. And even when the CARES Act was finalized and most of that was distributed through the SBA or banks, our businesses had not been applying. And so we quickly began to focus our effort on two different things. One, on a small business relief fund that we'll talk about and give you some information about. That was to approach our smallest businesses, and we'll talk about that, because we felt like they were going to be left out, and in fact they were. And then two, on businesses that could apply or interested in applying to the CARES Act funding, that we would help them with technical assistance. And we really focus a lot of our effort on technical assistance and the Small Business Relief Fund. Next slide. And finally, I think the important thing to say here is that we had a really good look on the different businesses from different neighborhoods. So I'm sure all the councils will be interested here in looking, and we can speak to different neighborhoods and what we saw. We had a really good look at businesses from size and what was happening there. And then we had a really good look at the types of businesses. And as you can imagine, our personal care business got hit really hard in our neighborhoods, and our food businesses got hit really hard in our neighborhoods. And so in many ways, no surprises here, but really important information as we continue to try to serve our small businesses in the city of Boston. Next slide. So I'm going to ask Natalia to talk about then, after we did the analysis, what we started to do in a rapid response for our small businesses.
Thanks so much, John. And thank you everybody for having us here today. So immediately after we launched—
Natalia, I apologize. Before the record, I didn't introduce you. Natalia Urtubey is the Director of Small Business for the City of Boston. Thank you, Natalia.
Of course, thank you so much. So immediately after, as John mentioned, we put out these series of surveys. We immediately started communicating directly with small businesses, where we were sending emails 2 times a week to over 22,000 businesses. Started at about 16,000 and our list is up to about 22,000 at this point. With that also came weekly conference calls, which we set up, bringing in our partners from different departments at the city to present information and resources for small businesses. Those have been on Facebook Live and video conference. And then we set up weekly small business office hours, which allow individuals to connect directly with the neighborhood business managers and our team in order to get one-on-one support and one-on-one answers to their questions. And so these happen at 2-hour blocks every single Friday from 9 to 11 and from 2 to 4. My team connects with folks individually one-on-one, and then they go offline after they've been able to connect, and that really builds that one-on-one relationship. And then finally, over the last probably about 5 or 6 weeks, we've been helping folks with small business support as it pertains to the CARES Act, and really ensuring folks have information and resources to be able to apply. We've been able to help over 235 people that have reached out to us to ask for support on signing up for PPP or EIDL, as well as referring them over to banks and other groups that are actually working on this every day. Next slide. So out of those listening sessions that we've had, both through our conference calls, the office hours, as well as the surveys, we've put out a bunch of resources, which are all available on our Economic Development COVID response page. Caitlin, can you go back one slide, please? We've put out a bunch of resources which are available to the public. We push out every single week. So we put out a financial relief handbook and a federal assistant guide to help people navigate all of these different resources. So the financial relief handbook actually collected information from local partners, nonprofits, foundations, state partners, national partners, and federal partners to really be able to give folks direct access to what resources were out there. The federal assistance guide actually walks people through how to apply for PPP or EIDL. We also put out an unemployment insurance guide, which was the exact same thing. How do you navigate it? Who do you contact? How do you do it? We also wanted to put out 2 different platforms where businesses could self-report that they are open. So we did one for open Boston businesses, and this was really targeting essential businesses, as well as an open Boston restaurants platform, which allows restaurants to tell people what their menu is. Do they have limited hours? What are the existing hours? Are they on any apps? Are they doing delivery or takeout? And this has actually helped folks get connected to more customers, as well as just, be a resource for the community. We have over 500 restaurants currently on that platform. And then we also have worked with licensing around expanding opportunities for these restaurants. So removing all barriers to being able to do takeout for restaurants. That was one of the initial things that we did almost immediately. We were able to work with licensing and the state on beer and wine takeout with delivery. And then most recently allowing for the sale of grocery items from restaurants. So making sure that restaurants, if they wanted to sell groceries, that they are following along the requirements that are in place by, I lost the presentation. Let me just get it back up on my screen so I know I'm gonna miss out my notes. Sorry about that. So just you can see below what the restaurant listing looks like online, as well as what the financial relief handbook looks like online. And then the last part that I'll talk about, and I think is the most kind of popular for discussion, is the Small Business Relief Fund. So we're able to come out with a fund to support small businesses. We really wanted to target the itty bitty businesses, the businesses that are really local to Boston and needing the most support. So we took those 7 categories that John talked about earlier. And we created a fund opportunity for small businesses to sign up. So they had to have three real criteria. One, they have to have 35 or fewer employees. They had to have less than 1.5 million in revenue, and they had to be physically located and doing business in Boston. So we received over 2,700 applications. Before we launched the fund on April 6th, so it was announced the Thursday before, we launched the application on Monday, and then we closed it on Friday at 5 o'clock. Just a couple of things to note: before we put the application out, we created one-pagers in 9 additional languages in order to ensure that we had access for all small businesses. Obviously, we know that the city of Boston has a ton of immigrant-owned businesses and wanted to make sure everybody had access. We also set up a phone line for all those same languages to be able to call in and get direct one-on-one support. So as of last Friday, we have dispersed 559 grants to small businesses across the city of Boston. And let me talk a little bit about what those numbers look like. So this is a review of the applicants. Of the 2,700 that applied, over 1,900 were deemed eligible. So that means that they met those 3 criteria. Folks who did not meet those criteria because of either their they didn't match those 3 criteria, but they also maybe they weren't the right business type. So we wanted to make sure that we were targeting those 7 hardest hit industries first. And so we wanted to really target those. And then we also could not serve nonprofits. So of all of the applicants we received, we had about 49% were white ownership, which means that about 51% of those businesses were non-white ownership. And then what I want to note on this particular slide is that we added actually a comparison of the amount of businesses owned by that ethnicity across the city. So as you can see, the representation here is clearly a little, more focused on our neighborhood commercial districts. Next slide. Did we lose Caitlin again? Oh, here we go. Okay, sorry about that. So of the 559 that I mentioned have received grants so far, this is the breakdown of what those look like. So as you can see, our priority of targeting small businesses is very clear here. 79% of the folks who have received these grants are 0 to 5 employees. 68% have less than 250,000 in revenue. And as you can see here, we have of those 559, 42% of them are white-owned businesses. Some other key demographics to look at, 48% are women-owned or non-binary. 44% are immigrant-owned businesses, which includes naturalized citizens and refugees. And 57% are Boston residents. So of that 559 grants, we've given out nearly $2 million. And then I'm going to turn it back over to John. Thank you.
So thank you, Natalia, for that. And I wanted to resume our presentation by talking about how we plan on engaging different industry as part of our reopening plan. And so the mayor has asked us to put together an engagement strategy. As you know, we've been having phone calls with small businesses every week. And so we're now going to have more specific conversations by industry with the businesses around reopening. And so what we've done here is we've got a strategy that is clearly driven by a public health framework. We need to have testing. We need to have tracing. We need to have the kind of capacity in our health system that allows us to open. And there are clear benchmarks around that. And then we need to have a look on equity. And so the health and equity task force work is super important for our reopening strategy. But that all needs to be fed by the actual businesses in our city. And so we've set up different roundtables that we will be engaging businesses through so that they are giving us firsthand advice, questions, concerns around this as we open. And the mayor has actually been sitting on a number of different calls, hearing directly from our businesses, directly from our industries, and then having conversation and dialogue. This will continue to occur, particularly as we get closer to reopening our economy. Next. As we have those conversations and create better guidelines, one of the things we're going to do is use our Economic Development Center. And so you will remember the mayor announced and launched the Economic Development Center about a year and a half ago, or last year's State of the City. And we started doing, in fact, workshops and engaging our businesses in and our residents in the neighborhoods. And these are the different buckets that we would engage them through. After the COVID-19 pandemic hit, we then moved all these engagements online. And so we will continue to engage our businesses through the infrastructure that we've created for workshops and webinars on guidance as soon as that is clear from the state. So as soon as we have clarity on what a barbershop should be doing as example, we will quickly engage all the barbershops in a webinar and begin to talk about how we will implement it in Boston as an example. Next slide, please. The work of the Inequity Task Force, which was a group that was stood up after it became clear the different impact we had on that the COVID pandemic had on different racial groups in Boston. The mayor said we need to make sure that we have attention on this and that we have to have a strategy. And so we have been working with the Health Inequities Task Force primarily in the first couple of weeks to make sure that there was enough testing in communities that were hardest hit, enough resources, enough PPE, and enough information. We are now with the task force beginning to pivot to have a conversation around reopening. And the central question in that conversation is, how do we reopen the economy in a way that eliminates some of the infrastructure policies that got us to a point where we have some of the disparities that we have in our health today? And so that's the central question. It's a big question, and there are a lot of ideas there that are going to help drive how we reopen to a more equitable economy. Next slide. We talked about guidance to certain industries, and so I'm going to ask Selena Barnes-Milner, who is the Director of Equity and Inclusion, to give an example when we have an industry that we have provided guidance on how they reopen, the kinds of things we do to help those businesses in that industry. Selena?
Yes, so this is an example. We just did these sessions last week where we, in partnership with ISD, provided very clear guidance on how to put together a COVID site-specific safety plan. So we had, content experts, and also were joined by over 180 participants over 2 calls that could directly ask questions through the chat or also in dialogue at the end. We also had several ISD inspectors in the meetings as well. So this is a model we're looking to do for other industries. We have the construction guidance now, but as they roll out further guidance, we're going to continue to do this through the Economic Development Center. And then this is just going back to the examples of our Economic Development Center content going online. This is the construction supervisor license exam prep. This is really, we think, a good time for people to level up their skills. And if they are out of work, we're providing free resources so that when they rejoin the workforce, they can come in at a higher level and have even greater opportunities.
The next slide talks about ways we're going to continue to engage. So it's not just about industry-specific engagement. You can go to the next slide. It's not just about industry-specific engagement. It's also about engaging our neighborhoods in a way that makes sense. So Natalia, if you can talk about the work of engaging our neighborhoods, businesses.
Absolutely. I'm not sure who's doing the slides, but if you can go back three, I think it was 2 or 3 slides. But one more forward. Yeah, there we go. So one of the ways in which we're going to be engaging our neighborhood commercial districts is we're going to be hosting some conversations on reopening. So currently we're looking at 16 reopening conversation with the Boston Main Streets and other business groups and associations across the city. So we're going to be grouping folks. 6 of the 16 will be hosting in multiple languages in order to ensure access. And then after guidelines become available for all of the different industries, as John mentioned, we will be doing industry specific workshops as well as EDC workshops on kind of how to run your business post-COVID.
I also want to say that we started to present this in an earlier call for small businesses. That call was Zoom bombed, unfortunately, and so we had to drop the call. But so this is the first time we're presenting the engagement strategy live, and so we're honored to be able to present that at a city council hearing. We will, though, reschedule a call for tomorrow morning at 9:30, and we will send you that information as soon as we set it up so that we can actually let the small businesses know of the meetings that we've set up. And so we appreciate you. You've always, the counselors have, and your team have always helped us to get the information out. We appreciate the partnership and continue to get the information out to businesses as we let them know about the meetings, the dates, when we're going to do it, et cetera. So thank you for continued partnership there. We now want to talk about the work that we are doing that's not necessarily related to COVID. And we'll be really quick as we continue to move through this presentation. We want to talk about them in the 3 priorities that we had introduced earlier and give you some of the work that we've been doing as an example of how we implement those priorities. First, we'll have Selena talk about equity and procurement.
So this past November, on November 8th, the mayor signed an equity and procurement executive order and also launched the Supplier Diversity Advisory Council that meets quarterly to support the rollout of the equitable procurement executive order. Since then, we have achieved a few of the deliverables outlined in the order. We have a new online directory of certified businesses. We also have through procurement, there's a new page that lists all open bids and RFPs for the city of Boston. And it also, which is a really great new feature, shows past awarded bids and RFPs so that potential bidders can see what a particular contract went for in the past and who it went to if they're trying to do their research. We're on track to develop a training program for all city procurement officials before the start of FY21. And we are also right now currently meeting with departments as they're planning their spending for FY21 and seeing where there are opportunities to help them source new vendors or help support their outreach. We actually have an info session coming up in the next 2 weeks for property management of the Bruce Bowling building. So we're continuing to do info sessions even as we're working remotely. We're doing online info sessions and we're making sure that as opportunities come up, we're able to connect people, certified vendors proactively. The other piece I just want to plug here, since I know you all have a lot of contact with business owners, this is a great time for businesses to become certified, especially if they have some downtime, because it's still the best way for departments to proactively outreach to diverse and local businesses is if they're certified by us. And so we're still doing certification. We're still mailing out those letters. So look forward to continuing to partner with you on that.
And it's important too that we pay attention to procurement as we are recovering the economy. And so the mayor has made it clear that it is important that we advertise to women-owned and minority-owned businesses while we are spending around COVID. We recently were able to put in an order for 500,000 masks to a local MBE. Those are the kinds of purchases that we're making an effort to do. A lot of the printing for information that went out to neighborhoods, some of that printing was done by MBEs. And so that's just an example, but one that we're very proud of. And so we'll continue to make sure that those efforts are live. Now I want Natalia to talk about some of the work we did with Main Streets in our small business tour before the pandemic.
Yeah, so we like to obviously get into the neighborhoods and not just bring the mayor into the neighborhoods, but do a lot of one-on-one relationship building with our neighborhood commercial districts. So what you see here is just a couple of examples of how we engage with business owners and our business associations directly. So the picture on the top left, we actually went out and did 20 districts in 20 days in December as a way of promoting our local shopping locally for the holidays. We've also, for the last 3 years, been hosting Mayor on Main, where we get the mayor as well as a lot of different stakeholders to join us on a trolley, and we visit 9 to 10 different districts each year, and we celebrate the small business of the year as well as the volunteers of the year. And we continue to look for ways of not just our relationships being promoted through this, but really looking at ways for us to highlight those local businesses and make sure that the community is also aware of the small businesses and the incredible work that they do every day. I think John may have gotten frozen, but I'll talk a little bit about Upham's Corner Arts and Innovation District Implementation Plan. So when Imagine Boston 2030 launched, one of the key indicators for us using the neighborhood and economic revitalization, as well as arts and innovation as a way of really plugging into the future of our neighborhoods. So after about, I think it was 18 months or so of community engagement, there was a request for ideas that was issued last July. We're still working through a lot of the technicalities around moving that work forward, but we anticipate putting out a request for proposals in 2020, which would include a home for the newest Boston Public Library in Upham's Corner, as well as really establishing the Arts and Innovation District for the city of Boston. FY21 plans and investments. And I think at this point, I think Krista, maybe you can take over and talk through these next couple of slides while John gets back on.
Thanks, Natalia. This is John.
Right.
Apologize for dropping off. Not sure what happened there. Thanks for taking on the presentation. And so we wanted to talk about some of the investments that we are suggesting for this upcoming year. One of the areas is in the Boston residence and job policy area. So Selena, if you can just quickly take us through some of these investments.
Sure. So in the proposed FY21 budget, there's an investment of $101,284 that will allow us to make key investments to support the transition to Salesforce. So that'll include a full-time employee that will help onboard all of the contractors that we work with onto the system and help with real-time support and training for staff and external users.
Thank you. Next slide. And so we also want to, we're also proposing an investment on the procurement side of this, so equitable procurement, and is also a part of the work that Selena leads. Selena, if you could talk us through this.
Yes, so we're hoping to have a supplier diversity manager that can help manage all the new workflow that comes out of the equitable procurement executive order. We'll now have a lot more resources in terms of tracking, reporting, seeing how we're doing day to day, and also working with city departments proactively to source vendors. So we need someone to manage that workflow to make sure that we're matching vendors and also sourcing vendors for upcoming opportunities, while also remaining accountable and transparent with our data and reporting.
So those are the two major investments we're asking to make in our first priority, which is equity and inclusion. The other investment, next slide, please, is around placemaking. It also has an equity and inclusion lens to it, like all of our work does. But in terms of our neighborhoods, we want to talk about the work we want to do with Main Streets. Natalia, if you can just take us through this new opportunity.
Absolutely. Thanks, John. As you may have heard, we will be hosting the National Main Streets Convention in Boston in 2021. And so we are really hoping to make some significant investments in the program. As many of you may know, Boston Main Streets is the oldest and the largest urban Main Street program in the nation, and we're often seen as a model for how to do this. As we have been learning and engaging with our Main Streets, we learned that there hasn't been a lot of shifts and changes since 1983, and so we put out an RFP to really do an analysis and really think through the future of Boston Main Streets as it pertains to how we can get more equitable investment in economic development in all of our neighborhoods. Really thinking through the established districts and the way the programs run. So we released an RFP on March 23rd and had it close out April 24th. We had 6 responses and we're currently reviewing those. What we hope to get out of this analysis is really doing a deep dive into some community engagement, as well as really a deep dive into an analysis of the program so far. So that will include doing a lot of community meetings, talking to a lot of stakeholders, including obviously the Main Street directors, the foundation, the boards, as well as Main Street businesses, other stakeholders like residents and clients as well. And so we hope that this will really create an implementation plan for how we will improve and enhance the Boston Main Streets program.
Thank you, Natalia. And then lastly, we want to talk about the investment in the Cannabis Equity Fund. So Alexis is going to take us through this.
Good afternoon, everybody. I wanted to give a general overview of where we are in the cannabis space. There are currently 14 host community agreements in the city of Boston. Those are in 10 different neighborhoods. The breakdown is 8 recreational, 5 medical, 2 grow and manufacturing. Up until our present situation, what we had open were 2 medical and 1 recreational. The recreational had to stop due to the COVID situation, but the 2 medical sites are currently open. So for the sake of our further discussion about the equity fund, both of those sites continue to generate revenue for the city of Boston via the host community agreements. I'm going to trickle back a bit and discuss the recreational. Boston had its first recreational shop open in Grove Hall on Monday, March 9th. It had a very smooth, successful opening. Not only was the opening already planned to be in a dense urban area, so we really made sure that there were clearly designated ride share drop-offs, stanchions for line queuing, open sidewalks, nothing to hinder MBTA services, nothing to cause any sort of disruption to the surrounding homes or businesses or church. We had already planned for that. The owner then factored in some COVID precautionary measures which further, limited people touching shared iPads, things of that nature. So the upsetting part of the timing there was that this was the first economic empowerment in the entire state of Massachusetts. It was the first recreational shop in Boston. It is owned by minority local entrepreneurs who have made a commitment to the community, who grew up in the community. And so their closing obviously was so early into right after they opened was obviously pretty upset in the cannabis base. Since the time I've been in regular communication with them on supports that the city could provide. One of the immediate supports was that Pure Oasis had their stock. They had planned, a month or so out from their opening, and then they had all of this product that they then could not sell. I notified the 2 medical dispensaries in Boston of the availability of product. One of those sites, the site on Milk Street, has been working with Pure Oasis to buy up any product that Pure Oasis is willing to sell them in an effort to have a collaborative agreement during this difficult time. Other supports have been regular communications with the state and the executive branch regarding how successful Pure Oasis opened in a dense urban area as they looked statewide at some of the problems they saw to recreational cannabis reopening. I emphasized the distinction that Pure Oasis had to have extra measures in place because we have a smaller geographical, very dense area for opening. I told them that they opened without a hitch and would continue to work with them on a safe reopening plan should the governor allow for the reopening of recreational marijuana. 2 of those highlights would be appointment only or curbside pre-registering of product. Pure Oasis has the ability to do those. We would further limit sales to Massachusetts residents only and use any of our media sources and advisories to push that message out so that we did not have other states residents traveling to our area, putting more people in the neighborhoods while we're trying to social distance. This past weekend, I was able to secure Pure Oasis a spot to present. They were one of 5 presenters before the governor and the lieutenant governor's reentry task force. They made their presentation over the weekend. It went well. Kobe was able to talk about his experiences as a small business owner, and he emphasized how he could safely reopen at his site and what safety measures he had already contemplated and had the ability to do. So we are waiting further guidance from the governor in terms of what he will start allowing to reopen and whatever modifications he has to his executive order. Remain in regular communication with our 1 recreational shop to ensure that he could reopen successfully if given the opportunity.
Thank you, Alexis. So I'm not sure if I'm having any kind of broadcast problems here, but
No, you're good. You're good.
good. Okay. So it looks
Yeah,
like
we
we
hear
lost
you
the
loud and
presentation. So I'll just stop there and we can move to questions and answers maybe.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you so much for that. Without further ado, we'll jump into questions. So counselors should have the order. I'll again defer mine to the end. So we'll start with Council President Janey. Just for the OED colleagues so that you know, counselors know this, but when people have gone 5 minutes, I hold up my gavel. And then after a 2-minute grace period, there's a little chime that goes off to say people's a lot of time is over. So if the chime goes off when one of you is in the middle of answering a question, feel free to finish your sentence, your thought, but just know that we're sort of trying to move along just so that everybody gets a chance. There's a lot of pressing questions, and I think, no topic more urgent than the one we're dealing with today. So thank you all so much. I'll now recognize Council President Janey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with your statement. And I have tons and tons and tons of questions. I will try to run through them quickly. I will try to pay close attention to all of your visual and audio cues. I want to begin by thanking Chief Barrows and his team. Chief Barrows, not just for the work that you've been doing, not just the work that you're trying to do to address the COVID crisis, but I want to send a special thank you to you and to Natalia for participating in the town hall last Thursday. I thought there were a lot of great nuggets there that we can follow up on. And I think there are just great next steps. And so I'm really excited about what came out of that conversation. So we had the town hall, as you know, and there were a couple of ideas. One, so Natalia, I know you have a lot of technical assistance programs. One idea was really honing in on the digital piece, making sure, and I know from my district, even pre-COVID, that the digital divide was real, that many entrepreneurs have to do the cash only. They didn't have the ability to do the cards. So I'd love to hear an update on that. I'm going to keep moving through so that we can get as many questions answered as possible. I just love to hear your initial thoughts on getting that off the ground, what it would take, how much of this budget would need to maybe be directed toward that, what the timeline is for that. Again, with any kind of commitment around summer jobs, I know we talk about that in other spaces around BCYF, but just important to highlight the importance of how young people play in our economy and making sure that they are safe over the summer and able to contribute to their households. So I just want to highlight the importance there. Trying to go through my list quickly. I've heard from a lot of restaurants and in my district, I will speak to restaurants that have a lot of concerns. Some who you would think, so restaurants are essential business. But unfortunately, I have restaurants in my district that weren't able to stay open. And I have a lot of questions about how the city is supporting those restaurants during this time. I know that there's a coalition of Black restaurants that have organized themselves. I want to give them a shout out. I think absolutely right. We have to be intentional. I know there's a fund that they've created. I know NAACP has contributed to the fund. I'd like to understand what contributions the city can make to this fund to support, if any, and if they can't support that way, what way the city is specifically supporting Black restaurants. I would like some understanding from you. I hear different figures being thrown out depending on who we're talking to about what percentage of businesses may not open post pandemic. And so I'd like to have your assessment of what that is and what we're doing on that front. My understanding is that Commonwealth Kitchen, which I think is a great organization, has been utilized to try to get some money out to some of the restaurants. I'd like to understand what that process is, whether or not District 7 restaurants are on that list. How can other restaurants get on the list? In terms of the Small Business Relief Fund, and I think this came up in the town hall, it's come up from other business owners that I've been in touch with, just the communication gap and how we can close that. So businesses that applied, got word that they applied, got the congratulations, but then weeks later, they don't know where they are. So if we can make sure that businesses understand what round of funding they're in, even if it's down the road, I think it's helpful for people so that they can plan. So even if it's like toward, the end of June, it's helpful for folks to just know. And on procurement and contracting, I always will have questions on that. I'd love that you have, some plans. I'd like to get an update on where we are with the trainings, on the plans that city departments are supposed to have based on what you said in your presentation, as well as those specific figures. I have a ton of questions on cannabis, obviously. I think I will save those for another round so that I can hear some of the responses now, and then save some of these other questions for the equity fund and just where we are with that. I would end my comments by saying there's not a lot of information that's coming about Monday and the reopening from the governor. And so if you could frame some of your response, understanding that and helping us and those who are watching understand what's going to happen. So from hair salons, I've got businesses, Chief Barrows. So I hear the governor saying that restaurants can open and do outdoor seating, but look at my district. I have some restaurants that can do that, but many others that can't. So I would just, as you respond, if you could also respond in that context. Thank you. Thanks.
Oh, he just muted himself.
You
Chief
weren't
Barrows?
joking. Yes, thank you, Councilor. Madam President, you weren't joking when you said you had a lot of questions. We appreciate your leadership. I'll try to be brief, Madam Councilor, to the questions, but we want to first thank you for holding that town meeting to talk about community-based solutions that we can use in addressing the pandemic that we face. There were a lot of good ideas that came from that. We are working on the idea of TA to address the digital divide. We're assessing what the TA would need to do. So we think it might be more than just small businesses, but also include small businesses. We will give you an update shortly on that. I do want to recognize that there was a general TA RFP that was released by the city this morning. And what we're trying to see is if that RFP can serve for this. So there's still some questions about that, but we did release a TA RFP this morning. Youth jobs, I'll simply say the mayor has made it clear to all his staff that we will have the same level of jobs, or his desire is to have the same level of summer jobs as we did last year. And so he's put the task on us, and we're trying to make sure that we identify the number of jobs needed to reach that milestone. And then for black restaurants, I am scheduling a call working with Tanisha Sullivan with the Black Restaurant Coalition to further address specifically some of their ideas. But in fact, as you recognize, the Boston Resilience Fund has provided some support to support minority-owned restaurants. We first gave some assistance to Commonwealth Kitchen and what's being called the Common Table to work with 20 minority-owned restaurants. Natalia has details on which ones, and you can add more. It's not a closed group. Right now we have 20. And then we also supported NAACP to specifically work with Black restaurants. And so Tanisha has an effort where she is working with restaurants as we speak. For the Small Business Fund, we've heard you loud and clear around communication. Natalia has been answering questions, but we're going to get back out there and communicate. For the council, I want to say we first started with $2 million in the fund. Those $2 million were immediately dispersed in the first round of checks. 560 checks went out. We gave out the $2 million. And then the council, we appreciate your leadership and partnership in approving the CDBG funds that we came to you around this. After you approved those funds, we were able then to make a public commitment to fund all of the other proposals for the grant. And so we're now processing that, and we're going to get those out as soon as possible. But I just want to say that that's tied to the CDBG money that came in afterwards. Around procurement and training, I want to ask Selena to talk specifically around the training that was in the procurement agreement that we had and reporting.
Yeah, so we're working with the budget office, with ANF to develop training. And we're still hoping to have that rolled out prior to the start of FY21. For everyone that's involved in procuring, as you know, it's decentralized. So that would include all the procurement liaisons from all the different city departments.
Great.
And then, Madam President, I know you had the final question, Councilor Bach, is on reopening. We are still waiting on the governor to give us guidance there, and I unfortunately do not have any information that I could share with you today. We're continuing to wait for the governor's guidance on that, as you are.
Thank you, Madam
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam President and Chief Barros. Madam President is, a great leader of the council, not a great role model in that timekeeping, but I appreciate all good questions, and I think top of mind for the council. Next up is Councilor Campbell, and then it will be Councilor Flaherty. The order's in the chat for folks who want to check. Councilor Campbell.
I'm laughing because I'm like, I'm going to make sure I keep my 5 minutes and not piss you off, Councilor Bach.
No, I just
my language, right?
I
So
love
thank you.
I love everybody's questions. My only point is that it's like if we just keep the time, then we can do a second round of questions. And it's
No
all
problem. I'm going to be short and sweet. So I can email questions that I'm unable to answer now, and then most of my questions will be big picture, less about COVID-19, because I know that there are many conversations in the COVID-19 space, including, Chief Barros, you joining some of the calls with the councilor and the mayor. So first of all, thank you all for the work that you guys do. It's not easy during this time, of course. The technical assistance, the response to our constituent cases, really appreciate it. Chief, not just you, of course, Natalia, your team, Selena, I saw Alexis on here with respect to our businesses on the cannabis side, and your advocacy for Pure Oasis. Thank you very much. And Vanessa, thank you. Thank you, all your people. So just some quick questions. One is, does OED track the number of jobs created through small businesses? And if so, can that data be provided to the council? The second is, and if the answer is yes, I don't need anything further here. And then the second question has to do with the youth jobs. I know that's been coming up with Rashad Cope. I know you guys play a role. We're still waiting on the survey to see who will be able to help with creating youth jobs, and then how we might help you come up with more employers or others who could also create youth jobs. Then have a question around, I guess, let's see, city contracts. Okay, two questions. One is, the other stuff I can just get via email. Capital. We know how critical access to capital is. So is there a running list of the places the city and your office goes to when trying to assist particularly businesses of color and women-owned businesses in accessing capital, and what that is looking like, how hard it is, where your successes are? And then the second piece is on this businesses we help, and we help a lot of small businesses. How do we help them contract with the city? That is businesses owned by women, businesses owned by women, people of color. They go through a process with us. We obviously have contracts we can give out. What does that process look like in helping them get those contracts? And then those small businesses that we don't have technical assistance with, how do we help them get these contracts from the city of Boston? So I guess the front stuff, email, the other stuff, I'd like questions or answers now if possible. Thank you. Thanks, Councilor Bach.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilor Campbell. I want to first say we will email the front stuff. We do know the number of jobs. For the record, in Suffolk County, those are 73,000 jobs. We can give you a breakdown of Suffolk County, Boston, and give you all that information. In terms of youth job survey, I think the last surveys have finally come in, so we will get you that analysis. I think we only sent you the survey from that last call. We'll get you the analysis on that. We should have analysis in a few days, because I think the last survey, and I might be wrong on that, but I'm going to go check and get you that information. Access to capital. We've created a financial assistance handbook that we've made available to our businesses that identify sources for capital for our businesses. We'll get you a copy of that. We will also identify the sources for MBEs and WBEs to make sure that that's clearly identified. But I think that it is started in that handbook. And then when it comes to contracts with the city, Selena, if you could actually give a little bit more on that. And Natalia, if anything on the small businesses that I didn't answer, please chime
And
in.
on the handbook, Chief, does that list out, the banks, the private investors, those who specifically are providing capital currently or in the past to our businesses, particularly businesses of color and women-owned businesses?
So it definitely lists private and public sources, federal, state, city. So you'll see that it's very COVID heavy, right? And so it'll have a COVID tint to it. But we will see if we can disaggregate a little bit, because there's been some new assistance that's been created because of COVID that didn't exist before, right? And so who knows if they'll continue to last, but we'll give you that, and so that you can ask questions after we give you that in terms of more information and how we can better cut it up for you.
Councilor Campbell, thank you for your question. Would you mind just restating your question about contracts? I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, so twofold. On the one hand, we help a lot of businesses or in residents set up businesses, start a business. How do we then, once we help them set it up, actually contract with the city of Boston? Obviously, we have contracts we give out that can help these businesses grow, thrive. And specifically, are we targeted in that assistance to businesses owned by women and people of color? And then for those businesses where we don't do any technical assistance, we don't help them set up, how do we do outreach to them around our contracting to get them on board or in the mix with respect to the contracts the city gives out?
Yeah, so Natalia and I work very closely, even remotely, but prior to remotely, we shared an office. So we work very closely as her neighborhood business managers are talking to business owners. They explain the certification process, which right now is the best way for folks to stay in the loop about contracting opportunities. As you know, opportunities are publicly posted above a certain threshold, but in that written quote contract threshold, departments are just getting 3 quotes. And so we're trying to make sure that our diverse and local and small vendors are part of the pool, which is now going to be a requirement due to the executive order. So she and I work really closely on identifying businesses they come in contact with that are good fits for government contracting opportunities. The other piece is that through technical assistance, we're partnering on making sure that we have technical assistance to specifically help businesses with the procurement process. So that could include help becoming certified or help understanding how to respond, how to write a good proposal or a bid for a city opportunity. And so we're working closely, and we're also developing our own workshops around contracting clinics to help people procure with the city, so they know what an opportunity looks like, how to respond to it, and what are common pitfalls when responding to opportunities.
Thank you.
And the only thing that I would add, Counselor, is that we are continuously running workshops through our Economic Development Center, and we are always looking for new opportunities to host workshops. So Selena's team with my team, we've been really thinking about what that looks like for the coming year, in order to be able to really marry the work we're already doing with so many businesses and trying to target the businesses we haven't yet connected with. So that will be a continuous resource that we'll use over the next year to continue to engage businesses and get them connected. Because I think a lot of businesses don't know that they need to certify in order to be able to go for these contracts. And so we're trying to make sure that that information is open, transparent, and easy to understand.
Thank you. And I can follow up with respect to the process. Thank you. And thank you, Councilor Bach. Thank you guys for all you're doing. Stay safe.
Thank you so much, Councilor Campbell. Councilor Flaherty's up next, and then it'll be Councilor Breeden and then Councilor Arroyo. Councilor Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good to see John and the entire team, Alexis and everybody, Selena and Natalie. Question, I guess the city piloted the Child Care Entrepreneur Fund last year, and I believe that they were scheduled to graduate last week. I'm assuming that happened. The pilot fund is a partnership between the Mayor's Office of Women's Advancement, Office of Economic Development, and Economic Mobility Lab. Can you give us a sense as to what the initial results are of that pilot? And is the city going to continue that pilot program, and/or are they considering providing additional financial support to those types of businesses post COVID-19? I know that the childcare world has been devastated because of COVID-19, arguably shut down statewide. So it's critically important that when safe to do so, we get that back up and running. And I'm thinking that pilot program, hopefully it will pay dividends, but I want to know whether or not we're focused on doing it again. That's first line of business. The second piece was just want to get a status of the distribution of the small relief funds. I was on, and then Madam Chair, I don't know if she explained, but I got bumped off. We've been having some technical difficulties today, so I may have missed that. Also, how can we grow main streets, particularly in areas that don't have them? And also, how are we thinking about moving our licensing and permitting to operate remotely? I think we need to find ways to remove barriers, to folks, and also given the new normal that we're going to be seeing ourselves in moving forward, having folks drive in, find a parking space, come up to whatever floor to get a permit in hand. I kind of going by the way of the dinosaurs, and I think we need to have a streamlined process where someone can apply and have the matter approved, and have it emailed or maybe picked up at a copy center or somewhere else, other than having folks have to come all the way down to City Hall or to 1010 Mass Ave or over to the bowling building. So I want to start to think about ways that we could start to have some of our permitting operate remotely. So that's it in a nutshell. And also, lastly, obviously, how can we as a city council, how can we work to help support the work that you guys are doing? You're doing great work. And as we move forward, you're going to be challenged every single day to do more with less, and how we can make your life a little bit easier, how we can partner with you. Clearly, that's where my head's at right now. So thank you for the great work that you're all doing on behalf of our residents and our citizens, particularly all of our small businesses, no matter who owns it and no matter what neighborhood they're in. I'm a citywide council, so I'm focused and care about all of our business in all of our neighborhoods. And I hope that you guys are too.
Counselor, thank you very much for the questions. I'll start with childcare. Natalia, I think you have more detail than I do, but let me just say this: childcare and transportation have become two overarching issues when we think about opening our economy, right? And so you're absolutely correct. When we think about the pilot program and what we've learned there, it is super important that we continue to address that sector of our economy, because without it, we're not opening an economy. So Natalia, can you talk about that pilot program specifically, and then if you can go to the distribution of funds for the counselor, and then I'll talk about licensing.
Sure. Thank you, Chief. So Councilor Flaherty, just so you know, the Child Care Fund really came out of, initiated, as you mentioned, from the Women's Advancement Team in partnership with Economic Mobility Team and our team. So what our team did was help put together the workshops and the trainings and the TA that will come out of that. I believe that it was a really successful program, and we'll continue to explore opportunities to engage with the pilot. I do want to note that I don't have the numbers in front of me, and I apologize for that, and I will send them to you. But there was, I think the number of applicants was way larger than the cohort total amount. And so we've actually been working with all of the folks who applied, and we're planning before COVID to do another series for folks to get the training that would come from the pilot without the stipend, to be able to continue to do that. So it has been a really successful program, a really great internal partnership between those three departments, and we will continue to address that. Specifically because not only is it a crucial moment in time for childcare providers, this is also an opportunity for us to engage with folks who have been traditionally offline, and getting them connected to kind of how to improve their businesses. Very quickly, as an update on the fund, as of last Friday, we have distributed 559 grants. So that's 559 businesses across the city and nearly $2 million. of that funding. And before I turn it back over to John, just really want to answer your question about the Boston Main Streets. So we are currently reviewing proposals that were submitted to an RFP process that we put out in March in order to do a reimagining of Boston Main Streets. And we will be looking at both you know, really looking at how do we improve the program, but whether or not we expand the program as well. So that is something that we're in the process of reviewing as it currently.
Thank you, Natalia. And then Counselor, I do know that Tanya from Women Advancement has the data on the outcome. So we're going to get that to you as soon as we can. And then in terms of licensing and permitting, the chair of the Boston Licensing Committee, licensing board, in fact, has assured me that we have everything online now, that even the hearings are going to be virtual. There is a group of city departments that has been working and meeting to make sure that all other city departments are following suit. So we really appreciate your guidance and your push on this. I think it's absolutely the right thing to do, and we've been working hard. And I know that we've heard you in the past when you've asked this question, and we're on it.
Very good. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Councillor Flaherty. All right, next up is Councillor Breeden, and then it'll be Councillor Arroyo, and then Councillor Asabi George. Councillor Breeden.
I'm still having some technical difficulties, the audio only. Thank you so much for your presentation. There's some really exciting work going on in your department, and it's very exciting to anticipate what's coming, but including all the challenges. A few questions. Main Streets, I have a lot of questions around Main Streets and just how we tackle the post-COVID. We had a problem before post-COVID in Brighton of having a lot of vacant storefronts, and finding a way to work with landlords that would be more supportive of small businesses, especially minority or immigrant-owned businesses, is a challenge that we would love to explore with you going forward. Also, I think Councillor Flaherty is concerned about daycare providers. I feel that the small family daycare providers are going to be a crucial part of our infrastructure going forward, and we've lost so many daycare providers in the last few years in the city. Many of them are going out of business, and I think any way we can facilitate building up that infrastructure and introducing more entrepreneurs into that field of business would be really helpful. Especially it's mostly a woman-owned business. A lot of immigrants use this as a way to get a foothold in our economy. So I feel that it's well worth the effort to try and work out how we can support those folks. Also, we're seeing a lot of attrition in our Main Street, Alston Main Streets area. With gentrification in the neighborhood, a lot of our folks are leaving because our artist community has been decimated because of high rents, etc. I'd like to work to see if we can establish an arts and cultural district in Alston that would reflect its long history as a music place for great music and an arts culture that has been diminished in recent years. So I'd like to know what resources are available to help in that effort so that we could reestablish Alston as an arts destination in the city. And that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Natalia, if you want to address some of the issues around that.
Absolutely. Thank you for those questions. So I think one of the things that we will be looking at in the RFP and in the process of reimagining our main streets is how we can better engage landlords for vacant storefronts. As you know, overall across the city, the vacancy rates are really low, but when we look at specific neighborhoods, our specific neighborhoods tend to be higher than the city average. And so that's a really big issue. I know that we have explored partnership opportunities with the arts and culture team around transforming some of those vacancies into public art opportunities, even if just temporary. So we'll continue to explore that. I want to echo your concerns about childcare providers. This has been an issue over the last couple years, and we will continue to engage with childcare providers. As I mentioned, doing specific workshops and trainings for them, but not just for how to open and start their business, but really how do you do some of the simple things. As we've mentioned before, there's a digital divide, and so a lot of these folks don't yet collect payments online, and therefore they don't always get payments on time, and then so it's a vicious cycle. So we're really working with them on how to get them on POS systems and platforms that will help them run more efficient businesses. A lot of them run their businesses on personal credit debt, which we think is obviously not the best way to run a business, and we want to help them really think about those strategies. So that is something that we are currently looking at and exploring. We'll continue to partner with Women's Advancements and Economic Mobility Lab. And I just want to know, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but we have seen a lot of childcare providers submit applications for the Small Business Relief Fund. And I can get those numbers of how many of them have been funded so far out of that 559. And just so folks know, checks go out every Friday. So we'll continue to update those numbers. And then finally, the arts community questions. We know Alston has been a designation for arts, and I do commend the Main Streets program in Alston for the incredible work that they've done to help elevate those artists in the community. And we will continue to work. We've done a couple of artist workshops for our Economic Development Center. We've partnered with the arts and culture team to do that, but we've also just been really focused on making sure artists have the tools that they need in order to compete in the economic market. So how do they see themselves as businesses and not just artists in the sense of public consumption, but really for their own economic benefit. And so we've been working with a lot of artists in the area, and we'll continue to do so across the city to ensure that we are supporting their businesses as artists. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor.
I think that's all I have for now.
Great. Excellent. Thank you so much, Councillor Breeden. Next up is Councillor Arroyo, then it'll be Councillor Sabi George, and then Councillor Mejia. Councillor Arroyo?
So I'm going to just ask these questions in a sequence, and then you can answer them as they're asked after. So let me just try and get these out. So I know that the OED launched a study to review city contracting and identify challenges for minority and women-owned businesses. Can we get kind of a synopsis of what the results of that study were and how the practices that the OED is using for fiscal year 21 were informed by the results of that study? The next question is what trades have consistently fallen below the required percentage of hours required by minorities, women, and Boston residents? And what is OED doing in order to address those compliance issues? The third is the economic development program of OED focuses on fostering economic development in all of Boston's neighborhoods, which considering COVID is going to be incredibly important this year in the oncoming years. Why is that decreasing in the budget by 13% from fiscal year 20 to fiscal year 21? Why are personnel services decreasing by 12%? And why are non-personnel services decreasing by 23%? And then I think the last question is, why is the small and local business program being decreased by 31.9% from fiscal year 20 to fiscal year 21? And so with those, I'm just going to give the floor up to you to answer, and I'll mute.
Thank you, Councilor Arroyo, for those questions. I'm going to first ask Selena if you can talk about the disparity study that was referenced and where that is, and then go to the BRJP question around the trades and their ability to follow those requirements.
Yeah, so the disparity study is ongoing. We're still on track to complete it by the end of this calendar year. We're right now doing telephone surveys to businesses to gauge availability. So we're almost, we should be done with data completion by the end of this summer. Part of the process was we did have community meetings to get feedback about what people's experience has been trying to contract with the city as part of the input to the study. And from that, we have designed some interventions, even though the disparity study isn't complete. So one example is the new bids and RFPs page, where every opportunity can be found on one page, as well as providing information about who contracts were awarded to, just in one simple place. So that was one thing that we heard over and over, that people have a hard time finding the opportunities. And then finding out what happened after they bid and who it went to. And we continue to design programs to increase access to the process, because I think that that's what we've heard the most feedback on, is that the process can be confusing or cumbersome. And so we're both providing technical assistance to guide people through the process, but also working with departments to see if it can be any more streamlined or less cumbersome, if there's any areas that we can make easier to navigate. So we're working on that daily, even as the disparity study is in progress. To your question about BRJP and the top trades, the lowest performing trades as it relates to our BRJP goals, they tend to be what are known as the mechanical trades. And so, for example, and what I looked at was not just who has the lowest participation numbers, but of the trades that have a lot of work hours, because we might have some trades that might have 400 work hours in a whole calendar year. That's not really a significant sample, but so we have equipment operators, glazers, elevator mechanics, which are more prominent in the private projects, the large multi-story buildings, pipe fitters, and then plumbers. It's sort of a mixed story, whether you look at private or public projects. The numbers tend to do better on the public projects, but I think plumbers are an area where they could do better. We have started looking at pipeline development programs, specifically working with the unions, the specific trades that we've highlighted. A lot of the unions have moved to being more regional. And so trying to develop pipeline programs that are really based on Boston residents, people of color, and women in particular. The trades do very poorly with women really across the board. And so those are conversations that are in progress. I don't have a program to announce at this point, but I know that they are working hard to do intake outside of regular enrollment periods and other such innovations, so that when there is a resident person of color or woman that is interested in joining, they can sort of fast track them. So those are some conversations that we are having.
Thank you, Selena. And Councilor Roy, I just wanted to also add on to that the disparity study is, as Selena said, on track. And so we would be announcing recommendations coming out of that study and then programming after that. But even before that, the procurement agreement, the executive order that the mayor signed, in fact, was partly because of the efforts of the disparity study. The phase 1 study and the subsequent conversation with the consultants helped us to understand that there were some things we could do and really drill down on the operation of the city to be better ready for the recommendations coming out of the study, and then also to just be more affirmative in our advertising and marketing. Also want to sort of add, you had some budget questions. And so the decreases that we have overall in our budget come from 3 different areas. They come from interns. So there is a budget line item for interns, and that you might be seeing that as a personnel, and then catering and events, and then travel. Those 3 areas. Sometimes because we have 3 orgs in our budget, you might see staff movement from one budget item to the next, and so they will decrease personnel numbers. But in fact, overall, we decreased no personnel. We actually, in fact, added personnel. Thank you, Councilor Bach. I am stopping the answer. Is that for me?
Yeah, no, it's all right. You can finish your sentence. It just lets everybody know we're done with the time.
Yeah, so we didn't decrease any personnel. It was just a shift from budget from org to org, but we did decrease travel, catering, and events.
Okay, thank you. And I heard the buzzer, so I'll just I might send some of these in an email or follow up offline.
Appreciate it, Councilor.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councilor Arroyo. And we'll also obviously have a second round. All right, next up is George, then it'll be Councilor Mejia. And we've also been joined a while back, I should have said, by Councilor Flynn from District 2 and Councilor Edwards from District 1. So they'll come afterwards. But Councilor Asabi George.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Chief, and for your team being with us this afternoon. As a former Main Streets manager of the Fields Corner Main Streets program, I'm really excited about the conference next year. Remember fondly, gosh, I don't even want to say out loud how many years ago it was the last when I went to a Main Streets conference, but just excited about them coming next year and the potential changes, not so much changes, but improvements to the Main Streets program that are ahead. I will say I continue to worry about some of our small business districts that aren't Main Streets districts, and really would encourage you and your team, although I know that you do focus and spend some energy in those districts, to really double down those efforts, especially during this time and the aftermath of this time. As a business owner myself, I am, I hold my meetings from my business because we are shut down during this time. And I'm very concerned that we are waiting for the governor's suggestions and prescription for when closures or when we start to reopen different business types. I think we should be much more proactive. In fact, I'll be one, I think as a yarn shop and as a sewing shop, I'll be one of the last businesses to open on sort of the later end of the phases. But this weekend, my staff that is currently not working, we're going to have a conversation about what different opportunities for reopening could look like, both to keep staff safe, to keep our customers safe, to understand how our business practice may change in the coming months. And I think it's really important, and I can't stress it enough, that these conversations start happening now in our city. I think businesses need to be collaborating with one another to think about different scenarios and how this contingency plan or that contingency plan may play out. Waiting for the governor, I think, is too late and does our businesses a great disservice. So I can't stress that enough. And as I've talked to businesses over the last 2 months or so in particular, that's their greatest concern. And my number one recommendation is that small business owners and their teams start thinking about what reopening looks like for them. If we're not investing in preparing, the time to prepare for reopening, the likelihood of reopening at all becomes less, and reopening successfully becomes more and more difficult. So, that's more of a statement and some advice, and I'm trying to be sort of very clear about how important I think that is. The forums that you've held, I think, are really helpful to hear from businesses, but in many ways, they're almost too successful and too large to have those in-depth conversations. We have one planned, I think, for next week with a group of women business owners that we've done some work with, and Natalia's been a great partner in that effort to talk about it. And my greatest advice is to start thinking about what reopening could look like, whether it's May 18th, May 20, whatever, June, July, August, or September. Those conversations need to start happening. And we should be looking to inform the governor's plan. We are the capital city. We are the major economic engine. And our small businesses, we know, are the backbone of our communities. So I'm going to get off my soapbox there. I've said it. Around the women-owned businesses, and again, as a business owner, obviously a female business owner in the city of Boston, I'm really curious as to how we are calculating the number of women-owned businesses. Do we survey in addition to them just being certified? Because I'm actually not certified, and I'm also not looking to do business with the city. But I'm curious if we are tracking women-owned businesses and how we're developing, sort of building that pipeline for women business owners. How many do we have? What's the waiting list to those that have applied? And what are the different barriers that we're seeing for women in business in our city? And there's my question.
Thank you very much, Counselor, for the questions and also expressing your concerns. I'm going to ask Natalia and Selena to address the last two questions there. And then I want to grab a couple of slides and see if I can share it for the council around the reopening question, because I think she's absolutely right. We cannot wait. And so Natalia and Selena, if you guys can do that and give me a couple of minutes, I'm going to grab those slides.
Absolutely. So, Counselor, thank you for your leadership there. I actually saw that you are hosting that conversation. Abby from my team, who you know has been doing a lot of work around women-owned businesses, was like, hey, flagged it for us, because as we planned these conversations, one of the conversation groups that we were thinking about was women-owned businesses, and I'd love to participate or help in your conversation. I think that would be a great merger. We don't need to duplicate efforts there. But I think you're hitting the nail on the head. I think a lot of businesses feel like the only way to be recognized as women-owned businesses are if they certify, and in fact that's not the case. And so the Women Entrepreneurs of Boston, so we have a growing list of women-owned businesses in Boston. We don't do data, my team doesn't do data specifically around women-owned businesses, although we could do a rough tally and get you some information about what that number looks like. But based on the work that we have done in the past is we do specific workshops for women in order to help them strengthen their business sense. We partner with women who are TA providers who continuously do work for women-owned businesses, and will continue to do that. I think we have been, with Selena and John, have been really thinking about what is the way in which we can collect the information for women and minority-owned businesses and veteran-owned businesses, et cetera, immigrant-owned businesses, without it having, for our sake, not having to do the certification, because certification is really tied to contracting. So that is a question, which I appreciate you bringing up. And so I'll let Selena talk a little bit about this, the certification process.
Yeah, so right now, and in case you weren't, I think you were on earlier, but we are continuing to receive applications. We don't have a lot of a backlog because we've been able to keep processing applications as they come. There are, so just to put it in context, the reason why certification is important for us is that if we are to stand up a program where we establish goals or any kinds of post-disparity study framing, we need to follow a national standard of a certification process, which our process has been reviewed as part of this study, and we're sort of doing the least we can to make sure we're meeting the highest level of standards, if that makes sense. So we've streamlined it as much as we can. So that's why the certification process exists, and that is relevant to city contracting. I also, in terms of additional barriers for women-owned businesses, I feel like, we all wear many hats, especially lower income women, women of color, women that live in the city of Boston. We wear a lot of hats, and especially right now, a lot of people that are able to continue working are having the added challenge of now having to provide full-time childcare. So we have seen some interesting best practices, like the recent project labor agreement that was signed by the Winthrop Center project, where they're providing on-site childcare for women construction workers. So I think we're continuing to learn from some of the best practices that there are by industry and seeing how we can be involved in replicating some of those examples.
Great, thank you for that, Selena. And I don't know, Chair Bach, if
I think, yeah, we'll conclude your time, but we will allow Chief Barrows to splice in a few slides. We'll count it as an attachment to the original presentation. So.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
I appreciate that as well, Councilor. I just wanted to sort of share the governor to Councilor Sabi George's point. The governor did share some information that gives us enough runway to make some educated guesses on what's going to happen. This is the 4 phases that people are concentrating on. I think the one that's more important are these mandatory safety standards for workplaces. And this is exactly the conversation we're going to start having with our businesses. We know that there's going to be safety standards that all businesses have to adhere to. And so right here, Counselor, is exactly your point. We need to take these and expand them out for each industry. And so that's why, in fact, I talked earlier in the presentation about the industry groups that we're going to begin to talk to about these standards. And you're right, if we can start talking about what we would recommend in these standards, we're doing 2 things. One is we're going to be ready or more ready. 2 is we will continue to send that up to the governor, because as you know, the city of Boston has a seat on that advisory task force. So every time we've heard from businesses, we've talked to Catherine about what we're hearing. Every time we get a opening plan from an industry, we share that with Catherine. We have a conversation on what we should be doing there. So it's just real quick. We can go over it in more specificity if the council wants, but I wanted to share that to reinforce the point that Councilor Manisa Sabi George made, that we do have enough information to be able to do some planning, some pre-planning before the announcement.
Thank you again, Madam Chair.
No, thank you so much. Thanks, Councilor Sabi George, and thank you, Chief Barrows. I know that's a question high on everyone's mind. Next up is Councilor Mejia, then it'll be Councilor Flynn, and then Councilor Edwards. Councilor Mejia.
Hi, yes. Thank you, Chairman Bach, and thank you to Chief Barrows and your team for all of your amazing work, especially during these COVID-19 times. I'm sure, as we all have experienced, we've gotten our run for our money here. So I just have some specific questions for this round. Councilor Bach, I'm going to assume that there'll be other rounds so that we can keep the dialogue going. So first and foremost, I'm curious about, can you tell me a little bit about the Supplier Diversity Advisory Council? How many members on this council are small business owners, and how many are them are minority and women and business owners? I'm intrigued by just the makeup of this council. I'm excited to hear about the new changes to allow business owners to see current bids from the city, but I would like to know more about how businesses apply for these bids, because I'm an exponential learner. I tried to navigate the supplier portal myself as a vendor and found the process really confusing. There are like over 43 pages of instructions on the Help with Supplier portal website, all of which are in English. So it would be helpful to try to explain this to users, how to navigate the system. It was just really, it was hard for me to. So I'm just curious what efforts are being made to make this easier for others. And so my question is, what can the OED do to make the supplier portal process easier for vendors, particularly minority business owners, as well as vendors who do not speak English? I'm curious about, especially with the relief fund. I know we're not here to audit that one today, but I did get a lot of calls from smaller businesses throughout the city who were unable to successfully complete the application, or the application process was not announced, and so they missed the deadline. It's just a little bit, would like some clarity in terms of what that process, what you have learned since round one, and what you plan to do differently and making sure that people have access to the relief fund. And then I'm happy to see that there are ways for small businesses to do research into what successful bids look like. But I would like to know more about how small businesses who don't receive contracts get feedback. Is there any way that that can happen? I'm just curious to know what communication is shared with folks. And then the last question is I understand and appreciate the whole notion around contracts and budgets, especially with Boston Public Schools in particular. I know from what I understand, they have a huge budget for food. The vendor, I believe, is out of state. Wondering what if opportunities exist to do more hyper-local contracting so that we can support small businesses here in the city of Boston. And I'll give you one specific example. And Natalia and I spoke probably like a month or maybe 8 weeks ago, I can't remember, around how we can support bodegas. And also create an opportunity to feed families during this time. And I learned, because I'm learning a lot in my role here, that setting something up like that wouldn't be so easy because of the way the contracts are. It just seemed like a lot of bureaucracy. And so we were able to launch that project with very little impact in terms of it was really easy for us to do so. And so I'm just curious if the goal is really to help businesses thrive, how can we remove some of the bureaucracy and some of the barriers that exist so that small businesses can get the support that they need? And I'll give you one more example. Probably like 3 or 4 weeks ago, I reached out to Jonathan Greeley to help talk about how we can feed elders and tapping into our small restaurants to be able to do that. And I was happy to see that Commonwealth, that nonprofit organization, is doing that. So I was able to see that when we have the political will, we could make things happen. So I'm just curious from my own learning, and because I hear from so many people out in these streets, what can we do to make the process more equitable and more accessible to people who wouldn't normally be tapping into the city resources? Thank you.
Counselor, thank you very much for your questions and your work and the fund that you launched. I think you to say our work has a lot of bureaucracy is accurate, and coming from the nonprofit side, community organizing work to city government. Like you, I spent a lot of time asking why we cannot, right? And we have a big law group here in city government that reminds me some of the reasons why we can't, and some of the laws that sort of make sure that the things are done a certain way. However, it shouldn't still stop us from pushing. And so we appreciate your push and the council's push to make sure that the process gets better. So I just want to say a couple of things and throw it to Selena and Natalia. We did hear from businesses in our main streets like you, and we heard from you that the bodegas and the small businesses needed quick cash. They needed quick liquidity. It didn't have to be big amounts. And so I know that Natalia worked very hard with the Main Streets Foundation to establish a fund. Natalia, I was hoping you can talk about that fund real quickly, answer the questions around the lessons learned around communication, what we did for communication around the small business fund, and then we'll throw it to Selena.
Thank you so much, Chief. And Councilor Mejia, thank you. I have really enjoyed being on your learning process, because I learn a lot too in just our conversations. And so I appreciate your questions. So just I want to address the Small Business Relief Fund process and our learnings. So I just want to give folks context. The mayor announced the fund on Thursday and we launched it on Monday. So on Friday, it was when we put out the one-pagers to everyone about what the requirements were for the application. And just so folks understand kind of other cities and other funds like this, most of them closed within 48 hours. Ours was open for over a week. All of our neighborhood business managers, Main Street directors, and community partners were helping to push that information out. So I do, hear that, if there was anyone that we missed in that process, it was not intentional. We really wanted it to make it very inclusive and very thoughtful to really target all of our communities, especially our hardest hit communities. While this was kind of in process, we also worked with the Main Street Foundation on establishing a fund where they could give out $1,000 grants in all 20 of the Main Street districts. And so those grants were given out, and those were, no strings attached. And obviously those, because they're private dollars, it's a lot easier to get them out. I know, did you have something?
No, I just want to, because I see the gavel and that has triggered some trauma for me these days. So I just want to make sure that we get through our, I did have other questions. So you can follow up in terms of the process. I just would like to get some answers to some of the other questions. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So Selena, if you could talk about the Supply Diversity Council Network.
Yeah, make it brief. So the council is made up of about a quarter minority-owned businesses, a quarter women-owned, a quarter anchor institutions, and the last quarter are nonprofit advocacy organizations that work in this space. Everyone in the council is either a woman or a person of color, and a lot of them have had experience contracting with the city and succeeding, like Janie Construction, for example. So they're there in a firsthand experience role. We do think the process is very inaccessible at this time, and so we are looking at, besides putting out the information we have already, how we can make it easier to navigate. So we'd love to partner with you on that, and continuing to make our process linguistically accessible as well. I know that that is a gap we currently have.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Selena. Sorry, it's just, so I do need folks not to, if you use the full 5 minutes to ask questions, there's not enough time for folks to answer. So I'll just ask you all to hold answers to further questions from Councilor Mejia to the second round. Councilor Flynn, you have the floor, then it'll be Councilor Edwards.
Thank you, Councilor Bach. Thank you, Councilor Bach, and thank you, John, and your team, and Alexis for all your work. John, on the resiliency fund, what was the average grant that you gave out to a restaurant?
Yeah, great question, Councilor. So to be clear, the resiliency fund, so there's two funds, right? So there's the Boston Resilience Fund, which is the one that the mayor raised for feeding people, for making sure people had the basic necessities during the COVID pandemic. And then there's the Small Business Relief Fund. So for the Small Business Relief Fund, we had three groupings of grant sizes: 2,500 for businesses of 0 to 5 employees, 5,000 for businesses of 5 employees to 15.
Yep.
And then 10,000 for businesses of 15 employees to 35.
Okay. How was I know there's language challenges. How was the outreach with the Asian restaurants, Chinese speaking owners in Chinatown specifically?
Yes, so great question. So what we did was we translated all of the material heading out into 7 languages. Is it 9 or 7? 9, sorry, 9 languages. And then we made sure that the Main Street folks got the word out. And then we actually had our business management team, Natalia's team, went out and actually hit those restaurants in our neighborhoods with flyers. So and personally talked to folks. And it was at the time when some people weren't there. So some flyers we left like in front of the business, other flyers we put in, but there were some one-on-one conversations very early on as we tried to hit the streets with the information. And we know Chinatown was one of the neighborhoods we were able to both flyer and talk to people and work with Chinatown Main Street.
Are we going to have another round of these grants?
Councilor, great question. It's a question we get asked all the time. We purposefully messaged that we pause the acceptance of applications, hoping that we have another round, but I can't answer that in the affirmative. I think it's something that we can't answer right now, but we're still seriously considering.
And John, you and your team, I think you do a good job of outreach to women-owned owned companies, which I support, minority-owned companies, which I support. How's the outreach? How's the communication with veteran-owned companies?
Thank you, Council. I'm going to toss that over to Natalia, who has some of the data, because we do have veteran-owned companies that did apply for the relief. Natalia?
Yeah, and Counselor, if you're looking at just who were veteran owned and whether or not they received those funds, I will have to go back and check. But just so you know, we've been doing continuous outreach with our partners at the city in Veteran Affairs, as well as the State Office of Veteran Services, in order to engage veteran-owned businesses. We've done a couple workshops through the EDC around veteran-owned businesses and what these folks how they can improve their business and access to resources. And we'll continue to do that over the next year.
Thank you, Natalia. And I just want to let you know, I'm a disabled veteran. I'm pretty active in that community. After this pandemic is over, if we could talk formally, and I'd like to learn more about your outreach to veterans, even disabled veterans.
Absolutely, and I'd love to partner with you on even co-hosting one of these workshops in the future, Ed.
Excellent. Thank you, John and Alexis and Natalia and the entire team. Thank you, Councilor Bach.
Councilor, I appreciate it. And I would say even before the pandemic is over, I think we would be really interested in hosting a call with that community with you so that we can give them information and hear what's going on that we should be more concerned with.
Thank you, John.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Flynn and Chief Barros and team. All right, next up is Councillor Edwards. You have the floor.
Thank you. Just a quick question. When is the Cannabis Board meeting and when will they start giving out HCAs? I apologize if I missed that answer earlier on. Then I wanted to discuss the additional CDBG money. I think it was $10 million totally approved. I understood that it's going to rent relief and the small business. So I'm curious how much of that $10 million is going to small business. And then recently proposed and discussed a liquor license buyback program to help infuse some of our local businesses with some much needed cash that helped to reform the system so that the city would then own the licenses. And if the business didn't come back, could use that or give that permission to somebody else. So I wanted to make sure that we were discussing those three things. So liquor, cannabis, and then also just the $10 million. Of the three, I want cannabis to be discussed the most because I find it really, it's vital to our recovery, and there is no equitable recovery without cannabis being forefront. So when is the board meeting? And when are they giving out HCAs?
Hi, Councilor, thank you. Good question. First, quickly, I am hopeful that with some part of the governor's reentry plan and Kobe's safe reentry plan, we could get some recreational cannabis open quickly. We've been having a lot of dialogue with the executive branch on how to get that moving. Then we have two other businesses that are very close in the pipeline. When I say very close, I mean have made it through the Cannabis Control Commission pipeline, one in East Boston, one in North Station, barring construction delays. I'm hopeful that they could be open and generating revenue by fall, hopefully October. And so that is just a quick layout of what is already in the queue. I recognize that your question is more about how do we get the queue moving. I am hopeful that the Cannabis Board can meet within the coming weeks. As you know, it was appointed right before COVID started, which has prevented them meeting in person. I understand that there are some other meetings that are being conducted electronically. This being a brand new board that we've, pushed out as a transparent and equitable discussion of lucrative licenses. We did not think that the very first meetings would be appropriate to happen electronically. whether it's people's access to technology, the digital divide, constituents feeling that doing this in the time of them worried about their jobs, healthcare, and other things. We wanted this board's transparency and equity to really be showcased, and we felt that that would happen in best respect in person. Obviously, if there are instances that show that the board cannot start meeting in person very soon, we would have to discuss other options.
So I'm sorry. I'm so sorry because I don't want to get gavelled out, and this is just one response. So if I can summarize, you don't know and don't have a date for when the board is going to meet. Is that
Not right now, because I think it would be best that they meet in person.
Okay. All right. So I just wanted to make sure that.
Yeah, no date. And
I didn't want to know about anything else. I just wanted to know the date of the board meeting and when the HCA's were coming out.
That was the second part. Yep.
Yeah, so the board, that will be, I guess, once they start meeting and they start approving the HCA's, they'll start coming out. I'll just note whatever's happening in East Boston. If it's Berkshire Roots, it's a corporate cannabis place. It's hardly equitable about what is coming out. So I guess I just want to bring it back to the prioritization for me is that this city of Boston, your office specifically, the Office of Economic Development, pick a date and that be the drop date for when they're going to meet electronically or physically. That to me demonstrates actual prioritization for the board to meet. That and only that demonstrates that. And I am disappointed that there isn't a date this far. We managed to meet with the BPDA, ZBA, other CONCOM, all of these different organizations are meeting because prioritizations of the city are for those things. And already we've been criticized and critical of this office and the Office of Economic Development's handling of the rollout for cannabis, feeling that it wasn't a prioritization and feeling that it hasn't been really a true partner in pushing forward. So I think to demonstrate partnership and wanting this to happen, the best thing this office can do is to get a date, nothing else. I appreciate all the other stuff, but a date of when they're going to meet. The individuals, you can come up with the technology for them to be able to meet to do this, but if everyone else is sitting down there and doing this and getting to the point and trying to bring back this economy, I think it's very important. As for the liquor buyback, and that's full stop. That's a date I think is the minimum that this office should be doing. That's the minimum. As for the liquor buyback program, again, I guess I'll wait for that answer on the second round. I see the gavel. But again, I'm wondering how we're going to deal with the amount of liquor licenses that are going to be available when a lot of restaurants can't come back. I do not want the Cheesecake Factory. I do not want corporations being able to buy up those things when the city of Boston could actually take this opportunity to buy them and then lease them back, infuse some of these businesses with cash. And if they don't come back, having for the first time control over a lot of liquor licenses that we could then distribute equitably in other neighborhoods if need be. So I think it's worth the exploration. We're going to have a hearing about it, but I just wanted to hear your initial thoughts. But it looks like my gavel's up, and so that's it.
It's 30 seconds if the chief has any comments on that.
Yeah, I do want to say, I think it's an interesting idea. I look forward to the hearing, Councilor Edwards. I also want to say the $10 million CDBG money that was voted on by the council, $5 million went to the small business fund, which is why the mayor was able to announce the $5 million that he was going to inject, plus the $500,000 from private sources.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks, Chief Barrows. Thanks, Councilor Edwards. All right, I will jump in with some questions now from me, and then we will go to a second round. I would just echo Councilor Edwards. I think that, it's very hard to have these businesses that aren't even a going concern yet that are carrying leases in so many cases. And I think certainly I feel a burden as somebody just who has a part in that process of the fact that they're dealing with so much economic uncertainty. And I think especially in a situation where not all of those businesses we know will succeed, even in our regulatory process, separate from the uncertainty of the economic situation, we owe it to them to help make that regulatory process piece move as quickly as possible so they can know whether they should be carrying these leases. And I'm also aware, and it was going to be one of my questions for you, Alexis, but it sounds like it's sort of upstream of the question of the board meeting is the question of us moving back to community meetings and how ONS thinks about that piece. Because I know in my district, there are a number that are all within a half mile of each other, some of which have had their community meetings, some haven't. And that also creates a kind of pipeline problem. So I don't know if you have any comments on that.
No, that's definitely something that we can continue to discuss. The lack of scheduling isn't because there is a lack of concern about the process in these businesses. It is more weighing the various factors of what is going on in people's homes, their access to technology, and whether we feel that people would think that meetings like this being held online prevented full participation.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and I will say, I mean, I think the flip side, right, is that a lot of our board and commission hearings have, sometimes not been accessible online or not been easily accessed online. And I think, we've certainly found as a council a kind of mixed bag of, you definitely have to worry about people not having access, but then you've also got people watching our hearings on Zoom that I think rarely ever made it into the city hall before. So I think, we're learning a lot along the way about this process, but I do just worry about people carrying rent, waiting on our process to start up again. I wanted to ask, John, I guess this is a question it's about youth jobs. And I mean, I already really talked to Rashad about it, but it feels to me like we should be targeting, even more jobs than we've had traditionally on the youth side, because I expect the private sector jobs to really disappear. And so I wonder if, and it does seem to me, I mean, I think that if we did that, if we were going up from 3,300 to 5,000, I think that would involve more financial resources, but it seems to me like the real limiting factor is placements. And so I just want to echo Councillor Campbell's question about kind of how the council can help. It seems to me like we should all be looking high and low and trying to think about ways that, and I know departments are thinking about ways to start, employing people, but it's like, I mean, we need ways to employ 100 youth here and 100 youth there, not 10 here and 10 there. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit just from the economic development side about that piece, because it just seems like we're running towards that deadline.
Right, Counselor. Yeah. So let me just share some framing of the numbers. Right now, we've last summer we account for 8,300 jobs, 81 to 8,300 jobs. I got to get my numbers right, and I'll send that to you. About 5,000 of those jobs are coming from private sector sources. As you know, another 3,300, I think, are city-funded jobs. The commitment for the 3,300 is there, but then the mayor committed essentially to anything the private sector doesn't pick up, right? And so you're actually right. We will be doing more for youth jobs than the traditional 3,300. Now, the real challenge is not necessarily the commitment to funding those jobs. The real challenge is identifying what the young people will be doing. So we're working very closely with BPS. We're working very closely with traditional nonprofits. In fact, we have 2 Zoom calls coming up with CBOs in the community to help spark the question, what more can young people be doing in our communities? And so we've already engaged BSAC, we've already engaged the Youth Council, we've already engaged, so we've engaged the young people, and they've given us some fabulous ideas, and we're going to continue to engage them. We're gonna do 2 big Zoom calls to continue to have conversations. And then to your last question, absolutely want to work with the council on this. I'm hoping that every councilor, in fact, I think Neil reported to us that you guys want to have youth in jobs. So we're counting you in. I'm hoping that every councilor can have youth working with them this summer. Please let us know. We're definitely looking forward to working with the council on this.
Great. Yeah, no, I mean, my team, we would love to host a bunch of youth. We've been brainstorming ways to run some cores. And I do wonder on the economic development side, whether there's an opportunity to think about like whether we could have, just in terms of how OED could have young people for the summer, like whether we could have youth doing a sort of census. Like I can imagine having a youth that, okay, you've got this Main Street, go to every door and figure out who's open and who's shut, then search who owns the things that are shut, try to get in touch, try to do like, what are hours, what's going on, reach the person, and could be an interesting kind of mixed in-person and online activity. And I just wonder if you guys are thinking about that on your end.
We are. We think we need to create a dashboard on neighborhood businesses and what's happening. We think the young people can stand there and count people going in and out of certain businesses, catalog them without really interacting with anyone, to keep them safe. We think that they can actually really help collect information, take pictures, what's going on the streets, submit reports online, and do a lot of that work. We also, Natalia believes that part of this could be young people in main streets. Natalia, I know you could talk about that with the Main Street directors, right? So first is having young people in all business districts, right? So main streets are not. Second is connecting with main streets to make sure that main streets has the opportunity to work with young people. Natalia, I don't know if you want to say more there.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right, Councilor Bach. I think for us, it's really important. We've done an inventory of businesses, but as you can imagine, with the opening and closing of businesses very regularly, that list is never truly up to date. And so we have been exploring opportunities for us to bring young people on to help us both with that inventory, but I think also digging a little deeper and seeing how we can get more businesses engaged with both Main Streets and other commercial districts. So yeah, exactly what we're thinking about.
Great. Awesome. Yeah, no, I mean, my office, so far we've come up with ways we could host 30 young people, we've decided. So, we'll talk offline, but anyways, that's definitely my time. I want to go back up to the top. And I think that is Council President Janey. And again, and I'll just ask folks, I'll just preface before we do the second round, we need our second round to be faster than our first round. So I would ask people not to ask a whole 5 minutes of questions. I would ask you to just ask a question and then give time for the answer so that we can be a little more efficient in our time. Council President Janey, you have the floor. Councilor Janey, you there? All right, if not,
I'm here.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So I appreciate the time, and I'll try to be quickly. I got all my other questions out, or at least I hope I did. I really want to focus, as I said earlier, on cannabis. I want to follow up with the urgency and frustration that you hear from Councilor Edwards. So you should know, I think you know, Chief Barrows, but you should also know, Director, that I filed a hearing order on just to see where we are with the ordinance. This industry is critical to our recovery. I cannot say that enough. We already know it was critical to trying to support Black and brown people who had been disproportionately impacted pre-COVID, and we know post-COVID, this is what we need to do. And so the urgency on the board, we are planning for this hearing, so you guys hear it here first, assuming that this works, and I hope I don't want to steal thunder from the chairwoman of that committee, but that is coming up in a couple of weeks, and we hope to have a date by then for this board to meet. I have some specific questions that I would like to ask on some of the data that you presented earlier, and then also on the fund. On the fund, it'd be helpful to understand what we're missing out from the lost revenue. Is it 2 million a day? What are we talking about when we think about, I know there was a figure that the Cannabis Control Commission gave that in terms of lost revenue. So I'd like to understand from that date in March, that Pure Oasis opened up March 9th, the lost revenue, not just for this past fiscal year that we're in, but moving forward, we got to look at July 1 through the end of the year. If you're saying, if I heard you correctly, you're hoping that he can reopen again in the fall? And then
No. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. No, I'm.
And then on the fund, I'd like to understand, where we are on revenue coming in. That was a very short window for the one shop we had open, but all of the other shops should be feeding into it. So where are we now? Where are we in terms of thinking about criteria? The fund was created to help support equity cannabis applicants who have disproportionately been impacted by the war on drugs. So I'd just like to have an understanding of what the thinking is there. If I run out, we will obviously have more time in a couple of weeks at the hearing that I will be holding. So thank you so much.
John, I'll start and you jump in. Madam President, no, I am hoping Kobe could be up and running in May, potentially June. He is ready to go the minute that the governor eases the restrictions on recreational marijuana. He's ready to go by appointment only. He's ready to go with pre-order. He's ready to go with a safe reentry plan. So I am hoping that Pure Oasis is up and running by the end of May. The fall dates would potentially be 2 to 3 other shops that have made it through the CCC process and we're doing construction. In one sense, there is one shop waiting for board approval, and I'll explain that after. It would be a medical conversion in downtown that would be able to open and collect revenue immediately. That would count as a non-equity license for sake of our one-to-one. But then that would allow for, if Pure Oasis were allowed to open, if the board allows this medical site to go recreational, that would allow 2 immediate revenue streams. And then hopefully East Boston and North Station would be open in early fall to continue the revenue stream.
What would be helpful, because I know my time is running out, to have actual dollar figures, what we think the anticipated once we end from July 1, FY21 to December 31st, what we think based on Pure Oasis and any others that are opened up, that would be helpful to understand that.
Yeah,
I would also like to
I'm going to
understand.
talk quick about the equity fund in case we get cut off, Counselor. That $1 million is in the equity fund. So even if no shop opened up, which I don't want to happen, that $1 million is there that we can start spending up to. So I wanted to make that clear in case we get cut off. The $1 million is
Thank you to the mayor for that, which I've been on record when we passed it on the council. Again, that was important that we've seeded that. I appreciate that. I think, more conversations around criteria for the fund, how we're going to administer the fund is what I'm looking for in terms of clarity. I've been getting a lot of calls from constituents who are concerned about the process, which again, we can talk about more in the hearing, but they're being told they need all these different types of letters that are not listed in the ordinance. They're being told they need letters from other counselors in addition to their district counselors. So again, I'd really like on this hearing to focus on the money side of it. We will have an opportunity to get into some of the other aspects. So, anticipated revenue, how much was lost with the closure, when are we going to get moving on the board, criteria around the fund, and then some clarity on the HCAs that are in movement, that are kind of not the HCAs that have been approved, but the ones that are almost ready for that HCA stage. My understanding is like at least a dozen that are just ready. Like, again, with the board needing to meet, because this is the time where people could be preparing and getting ready.
There are, Counselor, and we'll discuss it more. The one thing I do have to say is the group that is ready to go before the board, in terms of our discussion about the equity criteria that we worked really hard on in the ordinance, there aren't a ton of specifically equity designated ones ready to go, but we can discuss that further in the board. But I would want to clarify that even though there are potentially a dozen ready to go, there wouldn't potentially be a dozen able to move that quickly. But I can talk to you offline and online more about that. And quickly with the numbers, obviously, we didn't expect this to happen with Pure Oasis. So I wanted to quickly say the $1 million is still there. In the limited time that Pure Oasis was open, the metric I was given is they were almost doing 1,000 transactions a day. So I wanted to throw that metric out there, about 950 transactions a day. It was starting to pick up when the shutdown occurred. So I do believe that we could base some of our discussions on that model. And hopefully when he's up and running, we would have more criteria to base the other stores on. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Councilor Janey, and Alexis as well. Next up, we've got, let's see, I think Councilor Campbell has had to leave us. And I think next we've got Councilor Breeden. Do you have a second round of questions? Councilor Breeden?
Yes, I've just got a quick one. There's a lot of coverage recently about the commission that delivery services are charging small restaurants, and it was a problem before COVID, but it's only gotten worse since the whole business is now delivery service. Is there any plan in the city to put a cap on delivery service fees for Uber Eats and Grubhub and those sort of services? Thank you.
Sorry, the finger was slow there on the trigger. Councilor, thank you for that question. Yes, there are talks. We are analyzing the situation. We're also doing research on what other cities have done. And so we anticipate taking a position on this very soon.
That's all I have for now, Councillor Bach, just in the interest of time.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Breeden. Next up, Councillor Arroyo, and then it'll be Councillor Asabi George. Councillor Arroyo.
Thank you. So one thing to note for later, I don't expect you to have it on you now, but is it possible for me to get a list of the grants that were given to D5 small businesses through the relief, Small Business Relief Fund?
Yes, it is, Councilor. We've issued the first round. We'll get you that list.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And then just to follow up with one of the questions that I had in the first round, many of the performance indicators for the small and local business program seem to have decreased from fiscal year 18 to fiscal year 19 and then stagnated from fiscal year 19 to 20. Is there an explanation to why that trend exists and how the fiscal year 21 budget addresses that? One of the performance indicators for small and local business program is City of Boston spending of money spent with MWB contracts for the target year of fiscal year 21 says TBR, which, me and my staff were trying to figure out what that meant. If we could just get that. And then one of the things that you had said that is important to me is you talked about streamlining the contract process through kind of technical assistance. That's probably expensive or somewhat has a cost. If you could just discuss ways in which we can increase that, because really increasing our minority contracts is a big deal for a number of different reasons. We're at less than 1% from the last number we got. It's been who knows how long with that. It's been years. And so anything we can do in this particular budget to increase the ability to either, if it's a personnel issue where we need more hands on deck, if it's an outreach issue where we need more folks running that, that's something for me to fight on in this budget. I'll go to war on that. So if you guys have things that you would say, hey, this is helpful, if we could get more money for this, you could see some improvement on these contracts, that would go a long way for me. And so that's my final one, just that piece.
Counselor, thank you very much for those questions and for your passion around minority participation. So we join you on that. I do want to identify that in this budget, we are in fact beginning to create a supply diversity team. To your point, we have been low in minority participation and women participation for the last couple of decades, ever since 2003 when we struck down the program as a city. And I'll say we very liberally, right? Because neither you or I were here, but the participation has been minimum since then. And we haven't had a team that necessarily was working on it because we didn't have a program. So if you approve the budget as we have it, we'll have the first minority supplier diversity personnel anticipating being able to supervise and walk out the mayor's executive order and anticipating the recommendations that's coming out of our disparity study. So we appreciate you continuing to fight for this. And then TBR, if I'm not mistaken, is to be recorded. And the reason why we struck those goals is because the legal team on our disparity study said, look, the city should make sure that the goals are set after the disparity study, and that's why they're not recorded. We want to make sure that we're not prejudicing the disparity study, and then we have the disparity study end at the end of this year, and then we will set those goals.
And just the information on the data, the stagnating data on small business.
I'm sorry, the what? I didn't catch that last one, Counselor.
Just the information on the performance indicators on the small and local business. They decreased from fiscal year 18 and 19 and stagnated from 19 and 20. Is there an explanation for that?
Somebody on the call who's got that in front of him, help me figure out what those indicators are.
Counselor, can we get back to you? Because I don't have that in front of me. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm happy. In the interest of time, just get that to me in an email and we're good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All set. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilor Arroyo. All right, next up is Councilor Asabi George and then Councilor Mejia. Councilor Asabi George.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. So I just want to follow up briefly on Councilor Flynn's questions around supporting some of our Asian-owned businesses. I think across our district, we've got a diversity of Asian-owned, both Asian-owned and Asian-style cuisine and other types of retailers. And I do think it's important, especially as we come to the other side of this epidemic, that they're a very specialized group of business owners, whether food or not food, that we need to pay particular attention to around marketing and PR and additional support, because I think as a community, the Asian community has been really hit hard because of ignorance and hate through the course of this pandemic. So I think in particular, we could really spend some energy and some focus on supporting them on the other side of that and double down on that outreach. Also, we know that our city's budget and through our foothold in the tourism industry, we've taken a little bit of a hit, and I'm being fresh. We've taken a huge hit, and I think our summer will see that as well. So I'm just wondering how we're planning for that decrease in tourism, even while the budget for FY21 has seen a general increase in the categories like tourism, film, and special events. The marketplace has certainly changed. So how are we responding to that? How are we preparing for that shift, both in the immediate future for FY21 and certainly the impacts in the current fiscal year, but the longer term planning? What's our response to that? Thank you. And that will be it for me today, I think.
Thank you, Councilor, for those questions. Appreciate it, and agree with you on both accounts. The Asian-run businesses saw a decrease in revenue, a sharp decrease in revenue before the order hit. As you know, people stopped going. There was a lot of misunderstanding, and because of that, they felt the brunt economically. I know that we were out there. I know you were out there in the community, and a lot of us went to Chinatown to lend political support, visibility. I know our staff continued to go to eat lunch there, and so we would rotate to go eat lunch there, and a lot of us did that. We will continue to monitor the situation. We'd love to hear ideas from you about what more we can do in terms of campaigns for making sure that people are aware that we don't have more hate, right, and more discrimination. I know the mayor has made it a point in his talking points to talk about this. Natalia, I think let's think about whether this is part of our calls. We had it earlier in the go as part of our calls. We'll make sure that we reintroduce it into our calls as we talk about reopening. I think you're absolutely right on this. We're taking it under advisement, and we'll make sure it's part of our messaging moving forward on this. On tourism, you're spot on. If there was another part of the industry of the economy that got whomped before any order, tourism was it. It's probably going to be the most devastated part of our economy. As you know, we're a big part of the state's tourism revenue. That's billions and billions of dollars, and so we need to make sure that this is something we're addressing. We do have a tourism call with that industry tomorrow. We're staying very close to them, and a big part of that is large events, which is the hardest thing to bring back. So we are paying attention to a number of different things. As you know, Singapore Disneyland opened Monday. It opened at a third capacity. So instead of 80,000 people, they went to 24,000 people. But the tickets went online Friday before the Monday, and it sold out in hours, right? So there's some lessons learned in Singapore and what they're doing there and how we can maybe bring back some of our large scale events. We know we've got to go outside with it. We're hearing from people, we're hearing from restaurants and small businesses. We know the outside space is going to be part of our restaurant reality. It's probably going to be part of our large event reality as well. And so these are all things that we're taking in consideration as we try to spark up some level of tourism and some level of activity. Travel is going to be a big challenge on this one. I have to admit, Councilor, as you've raised the concern, we're going to take a big hit in our budget on this, and it'll probably show in the coming years, and we'll be talking to the council about how to address it.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're on mute, Madam Chair.
Yes,
Why,
still.
thank you.
There you
Thank you. All right, thanks, Councilor Sabi George and Chief Barros. Councilor Mejia, you have the floor, and then it'll be Councilor Flynn.
Yes, and I'll just say I'm going to take the time that Liz did not use and the time that everybody else used. So get ready for this, Councilor Paul. Okay, seriously, just a few questions. One is in regards to LGBTQ-owned businesses and contractors. I'm wondering if that is part of the mayor's executive order. How does your office support underserved small businesses not classified as minority, women, or veteran-owned? Just curious about that. The other question is, Chief Barrows mentioned that businesses such as barbershops will be engaged once we have better guidelines from the state. I'm just curious to know what role your office is playing in collaborating on those guidelines in coordination with the barbershops, nail salons, and other industries that can't do takeout in the short term. And I know Selena mentioned that OED is in the process of determining how to support small businesses and entrepreneurs right now by hiring them to provide services for the city of Boston or BPS. But could you expand a little bit about what that process is going to look like? What kind of engagement is being done with small business owners during this process? And the last question that I have is in regards to the supplier diversity manager's position. Will be to identify small businesses and diverse suppliers and facilitate discussions with city departments. What will that process of identifying these businesses look like? And I'm also just curious in terms of just outcomes. I know we do a lot of work to engage small businesses. I'm wondering if there's a portal or a dashboard that goes to show how many people you trained, what were the outcomes of those trainings, how successful have the businesses have been as a result of the work that they've done with your office? Is there a way to kind of see those accountability measures so that we can keep track of that work and how we can help support and strengthen that work? And as someone who worked 3 jobs during while I was in high school, I know that jobs are really important, and I'm glad that all of my colleagues have raised up the importance of youth employment. So I am all in for that, and whatever I can do to help support that, please count on me.
Thank you,
Oh, and
Councilor.
I'm going to say one last thing. If you guys start being too wordy and too fluffy with your language, I'm gonna shut y'all down, and so I can get these answers. Okay, go.
Yeah, yes, ma'am. I'll try to be quick. I'm going to toss it to Selena. Selena, I'm going to say that the answer for your personal care question, we're going to have a meeting with the personal care businesses before the governor announces anything else. We'll send you that date soon. We're going to announce a date where we have a call just for them, and we talk about some of the things that the state's already talked about and start planning with them. Selena?
So in terms of the supplier diversity position, the idea there is that they would be working directly with city departments to know what procurements are coming up. And they would manage the whole process where departments say, hey, this is going out to bid. I couldn't find a vendor. And then we help them out. But they're also helping to source people ahead of opportunities so that we can say, hey, you too can start a painting business. And then there's all these opportunities coming out. We'll help you get set up with the small business funding that we have and so on. And so they're really kind of managing the supply and demand pieces, because oftentimes there's interest, but there's not supply, and vice versa. There's the supply, but they don't know where they fit in with the city. making it more accessible is our mission, both through workshops, our communications, and very catered technical assistance to help with the pain points, such as getting insurance and bonding or other pieces that make it really hard for people to jump in. Another important area is joint ventures, where someone can subcontract with a more experienced vendor or partner with them to get into their first city contract, and they can continue growing. Anything else?
Let me find out you guys answered all those questions. I'm curious, in regards to the accountability piece, is there a dashboard? Is there something that we can track the progress of a small business? Particularly, give me an example of like an immigrant small business that didn't speak English, that you just give me one of those stories.
Yeah, we have, Natalia, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, so we do have outcomes, and we work with businesses over time, and so we track kind of how they're doing. I think we are in the process of identifying what are the right goals for tracking business progress over time, because every business defines success differently. And so we are not in the business of defining success for businesses, but we do work with them over time. And so, for example, if someone starts a project with us today, over the next, with pre-COVID, we would work with them. We would do an intake. We would do work with them for 4 to 6 weeks on a regular basis. And then after that, do follow up every 3 months to see how business is going. So a lot of the information we have is qualitative, not quantitative. And so we can talk about how many businesses we've served. We can talk about how much money we've invested in those businesses. We can talk about jobs associated with those, but tracking individual business outcome is a really difficult thing to do. And we are currently exploring how to do that best. But the best thing that we do have is those stories that we hear from businesses saying that because of, the support that they were able to get through TA or through loan program or a grant program, or even our Restore and Design program, they've seen the impacts on their business positively.
Natalia, can you give the counselor a couple of different things? One is talk in terms of numbers of storefronts we do every year, number of businesses we provide TA for, and then if you can give her a story of an immigrant-owned business, just anecdotally, that we might have provided some assistance to either TA or storefront, that'd be great.
Yeah, so one that just comes to mind is, and I'm sorry, I forget his name, but the gentleman who owns the Bodega and Cafe inside the temple in Roxbury Crossing. He was one of the businesses that we worked with, both financial analysis. We wanted to help him understand how to scale his business. And so we worked with him on both inventory, layout, as well as design. And his business has grown since we did that support. And I can send you those numbers for the businesses that we've served so far, just in the interest of time.
And Madam Chairman Bach, if I could just say, Councilor Mejia, Recreo is another immigrant business. You pass by them when you're in City Hall. Clearly, we're not doing that kind of business now, but when you get a chance, talk to them personally about their experience working with us.
That's great. Thank you, John. Chief Barrows, thank you for all of that. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. All right, Councilor Flynn, and then it'll be Councilor Edwards. Councilor Flynn.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Bach. John, the South Boston doesn't have a main streets. I was talking to Councilor Flaherty about it and other elected officials. Is it possible to sit down with you, have a discussion about maybe considering bringing back main streets to South Boston?
Councilor, absolutely. And I want to highlight the RFP that Natalia talked about, reimagine Main Streets. One of the questions we're asking in that process is, where should we introduce new Main Streets in Boston? So this is a perfect time to not only have a conversation with me, but I encourage us to work together with you and other councilors, Flaherty and others, to look at a process in the community that asks that question in South Boston. How can we be more helpful to small businesses there? And what can we do differently to help them? So yes, please, let's have that conversation.
Thank you, John. And my goal, obviously, is getting a Main Street, making sure we keep the current owners in the shops on Broadway or West Broadway, adding more support to women-owned businesses and trying to bring in more minority-owned businesses as well. But I do see, if you don't have a Main Streets program, I do see a struggling business district without it. And so we could really use your help on that.
Looking forward to working with you, Councilor.
Thank you, John. That's all I have. Thank you, Councilor Buck.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilor Flynn. Councilor Edwards.
So I wanted to first go back, and I forgot to just outright say thank you to all of you and OED and everybody as you know, before we come in with what we think should be improved and what we think should happen. I do think, and I apologize for not acknowledging the amount of hard work that you are doing and how all of you, each and every single one of you, have adjusted to make sure that the major functions of the office don't stop, including Alexis and I were just in the Charlestown, you know, figuring out how to make sure that money got out there from the casino. So I don't, you know, while this is part of this conversation is about criticisms and is about, you know, looking at things and bringing forth concerns, I don't want that to be the only thing you hear from me today. It is a huge thank you for all that you're doing and the hearings that you are attending. So back to the so back to some things I'd like to bring up. I actually, these aren't just these are just suggestions and questions. Councilor Flynn reminded me Charlestown also does not have a Main Street, and I really, just being so close and being actually so close and so far to the city downtown, it is isolated to a certain extent. And why we don't have a Main Street that helps already with stated goals of the city, which is to activate the Navy Yard. Okay, we're trying to activate a Navy Yard, which is already somewhat isolated. We're trying to bring back Main Street by getting, and so how we have, you know, not issues, but trying to make sure that there's a centralized place to go for Main Street to thrive and grow. I really would like to put that out there as something that is worth it, especially if you even thought about it as a temporary thing for recovery. How every neighborhood that, even if they don't have a Main Street, gets a temporary Main Street to help them move and look at what's going on. So that's one thing. One of the ideas, and I just echo Councilor Asabi George, and I think Flynn also talking about sidewalk dining. You know, I really hope you'll work with us to identify corridors in each one of our neighborhoods. I just don't want this to be about Hanover Street, which I know has come up. Folks on Salem Street are also interested in being part of this, but East Boston, Day Square, like there's places where, if we're going to talk corridors where there's parking readily available that allow for small businesses to expand, I think I would love for you to look to the district city councilors to tell you where we think good corridors are for that. I just really think it's important to be in partnership. And then finally, one of the ideas came up, I'll give to Gladys Oliveros in East Boston. She's part of Main Street program out there. Amazing woman. I'm sure she's already brought it up to you, but I'm going to bring it up as well. Can we think about, especially for those of us who aren't downtown and have still restaurants, a restaurant week program? We were thinking just East Boston, but it was a way of highlighting a lot of local mom and pops, maybe run by immigrants or run by folks who aren't part of the, you know, the chain restaurants, but a program that allows for the city to support folks 1 week, advertising, pushing and moving around about a certain corridor or a certain level of restaurants that buy in. I understand financially the city may not be able to contribute directly, but can you help set up the rubric for folks to do it? I know because you have the Main Streets in other parts of the city.
Councilor Edwards.
I just lost you. Your sound just cut out.
Oh, did we lose her?
Lydia?
I can see her video.
Yeah, we can see you. We just can't hear you.
Okay, I can hear all you guys now.
You're back.
Okay, so the it was really just about the restaurant week as maybe an extension of Main Streets, or something else.
So Councilor Edwards, thank you so much for those questions. I'll address all three of those, and John, if you have anything to add. So we've been engaged with the Charlestown Business Associations a ton over the last year. They're doing incredible work. And as we go into kind of the reimagining Boston Main Streets, that is a conversation that we're going to be having. So I would love to loop you guys into those conversations. As far as outdoor patios go, this is definitely a conversation that is happening right now with the street cabinet around what are those corridors, where are the spaces in which we can extend access to using streets and parking spaces for restaurants currently. We have the commitment of the licensing board and the PIC on helping us do that quickly. So just know that that is coming. And then finally around restaurant week, I absolutely love that idea. We will do some exploration around what that might require, what that might look like, and would love to have you jump in on that during that process.
Yeah, if I may just add, restaurant week that's neighborhood based is brilliant. Drive everybody to a certain neighborhood in their restaurant, so not citywide at the same time. Love it. Let me just make a formal request, Madam Chair Bach. We would love for every city councilor to submit ideas for outdoor dining in a very formal way. Please send those ideas. The second is we will be inviting you to, Natalia is hosting neighborhood, Main Streets and business district conversations. You will all get invitations, and one of the questions in those conversations will be where we should have outdoor dining, right? And so it's beyond streets and park and sidewalks. We're looking at parks. We're looking at parking lots, and so we want ideas. And the council, no one better than you guys giving us ideas about your districts, about where that should happen. We're about to start those conversations. We want you in them. And then if I may just tag on, Councilor Edwards, I think one of the challenges for Main Streets in Charlestown will be the fact that you guys are so organized there that we want to be respectful. So we have to do this together to make sure that that makes sense for your neighborhood.
Thank you.
And then if I may, Madam Chair, I just want to say thank you very much, Councilor, for first starting with a thank you. I know you see us sitting here at a panel, and we really, really appreciate that acknowledgement, but then there's a ton of employees that work for the city. Right. The first thing I do is I bring that back. And, when the councilor says thank you, it means a whole lot to our employees, to the staff, and to everybody that works for the city. So I just want to say thank you very much for that acknowledgement.
Thank you.
Great.
That's it for me. I'm out.
Great. Excellent. Thank you, Councilor Edwards. All right. I'll ask my second round, and then I'll just ask colleagues to raise your blue hand if you have a burning question for third round. Again, we're not going to do a full 5 minutes because otherwise we'll go to public testimony. We've had some folks waiting very patiently for nearly 3 hours now. So, but just to ask some questions of mine. One I wanted to ask Chief Barros was, it's come up in a bunch of hearings. I think we're going to find that capital money is an easier place to spend money than operating money in the future going forward. This is thinking beyond the FY21 budget, but even here we have a robust capital budget. And I guess when we think about, diverse hiring and an equitable recovery, one piece of that is how we accelerate support in some of our traditional capital projects for a more diverse workforce. But the other question is, if the city's got an infinite number of capital projects we could and need to do, right? We could fill the whole capital budget with resiliency projects. We could fill the whole capital budget with school projects. Like, we all know this, we're making trade-off decisions. And so it seems to me that from an OED perspective, it would make sense to ask the question of what kinds of needed capital projects would provide the best prospects for employing a diverse workforce. And so I wonder if you guys have given any thought to that. And if so, kind of what direction you think that might take us.
Councilor, that is a question that I work very closely with Chief Brophy on. We meet periodically. as we talk about the capital projects. And as you know, our capital projects are guided and regulated through the Boston Residency Jobs Program, so BRJP. And so exactly what you said, our capital projects allow us to hire women, they allow us to hire minority, and allow us to hire local. And it's really important because in some of our construction projects throughout the city, there are people from all over the region working on them, and many of them are not local. So our projects really do hit the local workers, the minority workers, and the women workers. Now, your question, I think, is a more strategic question about sort of which ones of those capital projects allow us to have more success, right? And so every project is kind of brings all of the different trades, because the city projects are big, whether it's a library or, you know, building a different building or something, or an infrastructure project. And so it's a good question. Let me get back to you, because I'll have, Selena, you're on the call, but I think we need to pull the numbers to see what types of projects, in fact, historically have shown to hit the numbers better than others. And I think, you know, Councillor, we don't do as well with Selena mentioned it, we don't do as well with the women numbers as we would like to. The mayor made a statement last year by increasing yet the goal to 12%, but it's still an area we lag in on all projects.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I'd love to have that conversation going forward. And just really want to thank you all for the work on the procurement front. I think that's so important, and it's good to hear progress on that. My other phase shift question is kind of, what are the areas, because while I was cheered in your answer to Councillor Arroyo to hear, you know, we haven't declined in positions at OED, and in fact have in a small way increased, but it seems to me like there's certain types of our technical assistance work that ideally we would just scale way, way up to meet this pandemic crisis. And it's hard for me to see how we do that throughput efficiently and effectively with maybe the existing like staff that we have. And I know, you know, you guys said in your RFI, we can do more with less. And I'm just like, sometimes like, you know, when you're talking about economic development and the point is to like bring us back from the recovery, like that's why you do countercyclical spending. So I want to hear a little bit about how you're thinking about that. I mean, certainly one area to me seems like mobile enterprises, like, gee, it should be the summer of 1,000 push carts, maybe, like it should be, right? Like everybody, we've moved everybody to takeout. Should we be moving everybody to food trucks? I would love to hear you talk a little bit about that and just reflect on the fact that we're obviously looking at a budget, and obviously this is resubmission, but we're looking at a budget that doesn't reflect any of that scaled up capacity.
Yeah, that's a great question, great point. I think the council weighed in on the city, the additional money coming from the federal government to help the city deal with the COVID pandemic. And so we issued an RFP jointly with a number of departments from the city for technical assistance. And the technical assistance, you see it as additional staffing capacity for us to deal with COVID, right? So the money that you guys voted on, I think maybe last week or a week and a half ago, is going to be used. And the first place we need assistance is in consultants that can provide guidance in public health and safety issues. So whatever push cart we have somebody that can say, and here's how you do it safely. Restaurants, here's how you do that safely, right? So in any and every industry, we need technical assistance that can come out here and work with our businesses to make sure that they're going to do it safely so that we don't have to close them back down, right? That's the worst case. The worst case scenario is we open up our economy, the infection rate spikes, and we close everything down again, right? So the city is being very, very cautious about this. We just issued an RFP today, and we're looking forward to responses to make sure that we have that kind of capacity, but you're dead on that question.
Okay, great, thanks. And I guess my last question, which is I think a quick one, is just the Main Streets RFP went out March 23rd. And I don't know the extent to which that reflected sort of the COVID reality. And I just wonder, I mean, obviously it would have been one picture to come back to Boston, you're the oldest Main Streets, and we've done a refresh, but now it's like, it seems like if we're telling a good story in 2021, it's going to be about how our Main Streets pulled together to respond to a cataclysm. And so I just wonder if the RFP has the space, you think, to reflect that kind of work and analysis, and if you just speak to that.
Yeah, I'll go first, Natalia, if you wanted to add. But because we were in the middle of the pandemic, we were able to have the question. We planned to put the RFP out during that time frame anyways, but we had the opportunity to ask that question before it went out. And we felt like this was an opportunity to have a conversation with our main streets and our small businesses about the kinds of trends and things that are happening because look, people keep talking about moving back to normal. We're never going to get back to normal. Our economy has changed, will change, and on the back end of this will be a new economy. How do we have that conversation with our main streets? How do we have that conversation with our small businesses, and then give them the appropriate support to make it in the new economy? And I think that's the conversation we think this Main Streets reimagining gives us. We think it's a great opportunity to think COVID and post-COVID. So it's beyond recovery, it's beyond reopening. It's more around sort of stability in the new economy. We know things like, the digital divide is a big problem for our small businesses, and we've got to have a Herculean effort to make sure that our small businesses are online, et cetera. There are other things we want to identify with our small businesses and address it. This opportunity gives us that.
Great, thank you so much. That's all my time. And I don't see any blue hands from colleagues. I appreciate that because I definitely do want to get to the members of the public. So I'm going to admit them and I'll call you in order. So thank you so much for waiting. I'll first recognize Marvin Martin, and then it'll be Wheezy, and then it will be Riley. Marvin, you have to unmute yourself, but if you have the floor.
Thank you, Chairwoman Bach and the rest of the City Council. So I'm going to read this statement quickly. And it's a good thing Weezy's following me because she will be able to explain even more about the same issue, which is really about employment in general. So we know we will be faced with unprecedented unemployment in general, particularly in our neighborhoods of color, as the economy returns. Therefore, we are proposing an expanded focus, and I'm sorry about we, I meant Action for Equity, and introduce myself, Marvin Martin, Executive Director of Action for Equity. Therefore, we are proposing an expanded focus on good jobs for Boston residents, particularly residents of color, using leverage from the huge public subsidies Boston employers receive to win commitments to hire residents of color, coupled with a funded effort to support the grassroots community organizations already working to connect residents to good jobs. We are also proposing a major job creation investment, an historic range of service year programs that bridge and transform economic pathways for a significant number of people in our neighborhoods of color. Even before today's pandemic impacting our economy, residents in neighborhoods of color bore the brunt of our racialized economy. In the hot economy, we were working, but tracked into low wage, unbenefited, part-time, unstable jobs and industries. Less income coming back into our neighborhoods, so our small businesses could not flourish as they should. Majority of jobs and higher shares of good jobs go to people from the suburbs rather than Boston residents. Residents of color pay less even with the same educational credentials as white and suburban residents. For the last 6 years, our network of community organizations has been demonstrating that our residents have the skills needed for jobs, but not the connections. We have been working with the City of Boston to implement the community pipeline to good jobs, so we recognize the city's interest and support. But even before the pandemic, we felt that more capacity was needed. The city budget reflects 3 primary OED programs: small business support and marketing, improving minority and women city contracting rates, and the Boston Resident Jobs Policy. There's also funding for training through the Office of Workforce Development. We believe that this is not sufficient. In spite of the city rather, funded programs reflect the old idea that Boston residents of color can only enter the labor market successfully through a few doors at the lower rungs, tracked through training programs because of their deficits. Construction is only 2.6% of the jobs in the city. BRJP covered work appears to be less than a quarter of that. Even if resident hiring went from the current 30% to the required 51%, only about 500 additional FTE workers would be hired. Important, but nowhere near enough. We support the city efforts to sustain our local small businesses. They matter to our neighborhoods and to our residents. But as data from the city shows, about 70 to 80% of our residents get jobs from bigger employers. Our neighborhood small businesses are sustained by the dollars brought home each week by residents working in good jobs downtown, in the Mellico area, and the Seaport. Good jobs for our residents and strong local small businesses are a symbiotic pair of economic arenas. We are proposing that the city invest in 6 neighborhood-based offices in the most impacted neighborhoods of color to support the grassroots organizing programs already underway. We take the term First Source program from many public programs already underway in other cities. These programs connect residents to employers, and when a community has been left out of job access, winning access often means being able to be the first source that an employer looks to. And then I'd like to pass it on to Weezy.
Great. Thank you so much, Marvin. Weezy, you're up next.
Thanks. I'm just unmuting. So I do want to both acknowledge, thank the counselors. I've also watched the hearing this morning on housing, and you guys are troopers, let me tell you. I'm so impressed. And I want to thank Chief Barros and your whole team. It's been great learning from you and working with you as we piloted some of our proof of concept programs over the last year. I'm hoping you all have the 3 documents we sent, because while we work with individual residents, and so we have all the stories, we also really have looked at the data and at the scale of what's who people are in the city, and also the scale of what's facing us. I think Councillor Bach, you used the word cataclysmic. It's one of the reasons we feel such urgency around scale. And so I'm going to talk about the big money item. So we're proposing for the community pipeline to good jobs, it's 6 staff people. It gives the Office of Economic Development a senior staff person to head a team to help make the connections between our residents and good employers and use that bully pulpit at this moment. And we know this works. We've demonstrated it. But we also know, looking just at the 5 neighborhoods that are predominantly of color as one filter, as a lens, so 60%, 62% of the residents in the city who are of color live in those 5 neighborhoods. There's 150,000 people working. You have this data. It's in the spreadsheet and in the pages, background pages we sent. 150,000 people. So the small businesses are super important, and important in all kinds of ways that affect people, how people think and how people feel, as well as just the jobs. But we also then will have 120,000 people, and if unemployment is an additional 20% or 30% or 40%, we're looking at tens of thousands of people unemployed. So we're also proposing that we really stretch to do really creative programming in the way that people did in the Depression, where you talk about the Works Progress Administration, or I came up with a CETA program, or AmeriCorps type programs. There's any number of these kind of service year programs where people are not left behind, where we really think about how those programs can take our residents and have a pathway. We called this a bridge and transform budget proposal, that there's a pathway back into the improving economy for people. So these are the folks who would be not immediately brought back into the improving economy, but not left out in the meantime. That every one of these programs meets some criteria, whether it's that there's a GED component if necessary, there's a credential, that it's doing some of the work that's in the capital budget. The city has experimented with community residents helping to paint, I think it was at Madison Park. I mean, the city's done very creative stuff. How we think, I mean, we could do green economy service year. We could do ESL and literacy core. You know, people, we could do this. We could have a whole set of our younger men who are so good with technology doing a digital divide program where they get credentialed and they wire their own neighborhood, and then they train people to use, they work with the old ladies to be able to set up their computers and turn them on and fix their phones. You could imagine this. This is not what's going to happen next week, but if we're looking at 2 years for our neighborhoods to come back, so we're proposing $200 million. We know that doesn't turn on a dime, but the city runs a $3 billion budget, and if you include the capital project, $6.6 billion. And the alternative is that 100,000 people get left behind, and they're not, and we don't think that should happen. So those would love to have more conversations, would love to explain the data that's in your, I want to thank the city. The city does amazing reports and amazing data. Virtually every piece of information that was given to you and that we use comes out of a city report. Most of our understanding comes directly from city analysis. So we know there's plenty of people really concerned with these issues, and we want to appreciate that and acknowledge that.
Great, thank you so much. And yes, the whole council should get that data, and we'll make sure, I imagine you've also sent it to Chief Barros, but we'll also make sure he has it. And yeah, just really, really appreciate you weighing in on that. I agree, we have to do transformative, big picture things here, so.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now I think it's 5:14, and I'm very cognizant that our central staff here at City Council has to run another hearing at 5:30 this evening. So I am going to just thank Chief Barros and the whole team so much, both for all the work you do and for spending this time with us today, and taking everyone's questions so seriously. And so with that, I'm adjourning this meeting of the City Council's Committee on Ways and Means. Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Bye, everybody. It was good to see you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Keep it up.